Welcome, everyone. The event is now live. John, please take it away.
Thank you, Paula. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's online summit, What's Ahead for Your Remote Workforce in 2022. This event was organized by the hardworking folks at Redmond Magazine and Virtualization and Cloud Review, who have brought together some of the best independent experts on today's topics. Many thanks to our generous sponsors, Martello, Splashtop, Okta, RingCentral, and Smarsh, without whom this event would not be possible. And thanks to you for joining us. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief of Application Development Trends, and I'll be your moderator for the first of 3 information-packed sessions. But before we get underway here, I need to go over just a few housekeeping details. Each of today's sessions is being recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording. It'll be coming your way within the next few days. Each of today's sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. You can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. Please feel free to add your questions as they occur to you throughout the summit. We'll do our very best to get to all of them. Our sponsors have provided some resources that can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. Be sure to take a moment to check those out. And last but not least, at the end of the 3rd session, one lucky attendee will be receiving a pair of Apple's AirPods Max wireless over-ear headphones with active noise cancellation, spatial audio, and adaptive EQ. But you must be present to win, so stick with us. And now let's get to our first session, the Remote Workforce for Enterprises in 2022, a look ahead. For this session, we called on technologist, content creator, and senior resultant, Howard M. Cohen. In his 35-plus years in the IT industry, Mr. Cohen has held senior executive positions in many of the top channel partner organizations, and he currently writes for and about the IP channel. He is a sought-after speaker, an insightful observer of the technology landscape, and one of my favorite presenters. You are in for a great one. Take it away, Howard.
Thank you so much, John. I just have to keep reminding you, Mr. Cohen was my dad. Anyway, hello, everybody. Welcome to today's session. Those of you who have attended any of my sessions in the past know that I always like to start off by focusing in on a particular word. And today being no different, today's word is anachronism. Now, there are those who've suggested that I am an anachronism, but that's why I call myself a senior resultant. I'll give you a couple of examples of an anachronism. Here's one. There actually may be some of you on this session today that don't know what that is, but that is actually a telephone, a rotary dial telephone. Somebody at some point in time thought that was a good way to indicate the numbers that you were dialing. I can't really imagine how they came up with that, but that was a dial telephone. Another one is the whole concept of counterclockwise, or as they say across the pond, anti-clockwise. Most kids today don't know what a clockwise is because they're used to digital clocks. So we have a lot of anachronisms all around us. What's old stays old, and what's new is new. No other way than that. So I have an anachronism that I guess it's an anachronism of the future. Soon, we will find that the phrase going to work is an anachronism. Nobody will know what you're talking about. What do you mean you're going to work? You get to work. Get to work. Okay. Let's go back in time just a little bit to understand the derivation of this. This gentleman is famous for saying that work has become an activity, not a place, not a destination, just something to do. And this gentleman's name is Robert Frankenberg. At the time that he said it, he was the chairman of the Novell Corporation, Novell at that time being the premier network operating system in the world. And that time was 1994, 28 years ago, at the Massachusetts Software Council meeting, 1994. And he was saying it's become an activity, not a place. And some of you who are as old as I am may remember telecommuting. We were all telecommuting. during bad storms or during national conferences in big cities, when there was no way to get through the traffic, we would telecommute. And it didn't really stick. I mean, it happened sometimes. And some people actually did it, but it wasn't a popular thing to do. It wasn't popular. Well, the question that gets raised is, what took so long? Why did it take 28 years for us to get to finally work from home is like almost normal? And the answer is the farmer's shadow. There's an old saying that says that the farmer's shadow is the best fertilizer, meaning that if the farmer's casting a shadow over the crops, those crops will grow. The farmer has to be there, physically be there with the crops. And I say hogwash, nonsense. The farmer does not have to be there, especially with today's agricultural sciences. You can grow wonderful crops, and the farmer can be in some high-rise tower in some city nearby or far away. What has occasioned the change, what has finally brought us to the time where we got used to the idea of working from home, we got kind of liking the idea of working from home, was this: a global pandemic. Yay! Okay. All kidding aside, the global pandemic motivated everybody to send people home to work. And in doing so, it created a global digital transformation. The way in which we use technology changed. And it did so instantly. Literally in a day, we sent everybody home and had them working from home. If you told me you were going to do that, I would laugh at you, right? You would laugh if somebody told you that they were going to just send millions of people home tomorrow and let them all work from home. It's physically impossible, but we did it. We did it because basically we were prepared. We knew that, Frankenberg told us it's an activity, not a place. It became an activity. Instead of going to work, we started getting to work. And then we started to realize we liked it. But, of course, it raised some questions. For example, we have a data center, and nobody's allowed to go to the building. You may remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we were all sheltering in place. Nobody could go out. And so the data center was basically deserted. There's nobody there to run it. We needed a better strategy. And, of course, those people who had already migrated to cloud had a better strategy. And today they report how easy it was to get everybody working from home. Another thing that changed was the whole concept of our threat surface. You're looking at two office buildings. Each of these, and the two taken together, can be considered a threat surface. Basically all of our people are there. They're all connected to the network, and the area around where we're all connected is our fundamental threat surface. If I can protect that, if I can scan that, if I can go hunting for people creating anomalies in that space, I can prevent bad things from happening on my network. That was great. Of course, COVID redefined the threat surface, and now it was massive. People's homes all over the place. Lots of them. So what we're looking at are people's homes in, that's Brooklyn, Manhattan, and New Jersey. You don't even know where those homes may be, but you got to protect them. Part of your threat surface. And by the way, for those of you who think this is some kind of network map, it kind of is. This is a New York City subway map, the best one with this kind of view. So now you have this expanded threat surface, and you have to worry about it. And everybody's office kind of looked like this. And we have no idea then or even now for how long we're going to remain this way. And how long are we going to be continuing to work from home? And it's become a better question because it's not only how long, it's if. Let me explain what I mean. FlexJobs did a survey of employees and their employers to gauge how they felt about the idea of working from home. And from the employees, they found some very interesting stuff. The first thing that employees told them was that remote work leads to better mental health. I don't get as crazy at home. Now, there are some of you who say, are they kidding me? You know, home is nuts. There are others who are saying, yeah, there's a lot less to drive me crazy at home. I think it's different strokes for different folks there, but most employees said that remote work led to a feeling of better mental health. It also was an environment in which they could save some money. They didn't have to go out and buy lunch as much. They didn't have to go out to lunch as much. They didn't have to dry clean their work clothes. Business up top, casual at the bottom. Great, terrific. And they loved that. On average, they save $4,000 a year. The top benefits in the survey, number one, was not having a commute. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anybody. Nobody wanted to get on a train or a bus. They were really happy to just start working. And then the next after that was the cost savings. Some claimed that they saved as much as $5,000 a year. Some said that their savings exceeded $10,000 a year. It's an amazing amount of money. And this will figure into some of the things we review next. What else did we find out? These employees reported feeling that they were far more productive at home than they were in the office. Why? And the top reasons, there were fewer interruptions at home. Now, I'm sure plenty of you are thinking, you kidding? The kids, my dog, the mail delivery, UPS shows up. I mean, there's all kinds of interruptions. Neighbors stopping by. Home is much more, 68, 2/3 of the people surveyed said there are fewer interruptions at home than at work. There's more focused time where I can sit and think and do my job. It's a quieter work environment at home. Clearly, a lot of the people they surveyed had no children. It's a more comfortable workplace. Not for nothing, but yeah, I've always had a much more comfortable office at home than I did because I would spend more on the furniture. It's a more comfortable workplace. The interesting one for me was avoiding office politics. More than half were looking to avoid office politics. And boy, I don't know about you, but I sure get that. It's nice to not be confronted with certain things. People actually have to go out of their way to reach out and ruin your day with their politics. No surprise then, 97% of them want to continue some form of remote work after the pandemic has been resolved, one way or another. There are now those, including Dr. Fauci, who think it's not going to end. We're just going to learn to live with it like we did the flu. And that's kind of, I guess that makes sense. But almost all of them want to continue some form of remote work when we get to that place. No surprise. What about the employers, the managers? The first thing management learned was that the lack of commute was among the top reasons employees liked working from home. Many of them were probably offended that their employees didn't want to come see them and work with them day in and day out. When then they found out, it's not you, relax, it's the commute. I hate commuting. And that's no surprise. So I think these executives felt a little bit better. Another good thing, and I don't know about you, but I thought it was great, is that with people not commuting, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions was the same as taking like 600,000 cars off the road. Let's keep doing that. That forestalls the end, and that would be really good. Here's the one that I think is most telling, most important. And if you get nothing else out of today's session, remember this one. Most employees who were working from home just started working when they would ordinarily leave on their commute. Nobody asked them to. Nobody forced them to. Nobody paid them to. It just felt more natural. They just started working. And they would continue working until they would ordinarily get home from work at the end. So if their commute was an hour each way, that was 2 additional hours that the company was enjoying at no additional cost to them. And no additional stress either. They didn't have to demand it or ask for it or cajole anybody. People were just doing it. And it says an awful lot about the work ethic. You know, people misanticipate the work ethic around us. A lot of people have great work ethic, and it was demonstrated in this survey. Now here we get to the 97%. 58% of employees admitted they would start looking for a new job if they were told, yeah, can't keep working from home at all. Matter of fact, 44% know somebody who's already quit their job, and a quarter of them, 24%, almost a quarter of them, would be willing to take a pay cut or lose some vacation time if it meant they could continue working from home. And that's where you start to calculate in that $5,000 or $10,000 savings. They could afford the pay cut because they were saving money. They didn't have to spend money. So that pay cut maybe represented most of the money that they saved. You know, if they get to stay at home, their income doesn't change. Doesn't sound bad to me. So, oh, by the way, the executives themselves, 90% of them expect to work from home. So it's something everybody wants to see happen. What else did they learn? We learned that in total, businesses lose about $600 billion a year to workplace distractions in the office, in the shop floor. $600 billion for people tapping each other on the shoulder. Hey, what do you think of that game? Whatever. $600 billion. We also estimated that remote workers are 35 to 40% more productive than their in-office counterparts. So the employees were right. They were being more productive. They are being more productive. As a matter of fact, the employers acknowledged that, 2/3 of them said that productivity is no different. We didn't lose anything with people going home to work. And a quarter of them said, hey, it's better. Even the employers are recognizing that their employees are more productive when they work from home than when they work in the office. So we're starting to see much more agreement. 51% of the executives report being more productive working from home. I suspect that that's an underestimation. 60% reported being more productive than they thought they would be, which is an interesting thing to think about. And this is my favorite one. On average, they said that their productivity at home was 7% higher than they had expected. I do not know how anybody could have derived that statistic, but there it is. FlexJobs said this, so I'm just reporting it. And 40% of workers reported being more productive. Again, no surprise. So this is what we have found in the recent studies. Very interesting stuff. Now, let's look into the future. That's what we're here for, right? A look ahead. Even now, 44% of companies won't allow remote work going into the future. 44% that, nope, can't do it. But 85% of the managers working in those companies see it as the new normal. They fully expect that they're going to continue working from home. It's the new normal. So there seems to be some discord between the companies and those who work as managers in those companies. And that'll be interesting to see how that develops. 16% of companies already have announced that they're not coming back. Everybody's now, if you remember back at the very beginning of the pandemic, I reported that Twitter had announced that they're done. They're not coming back to the office. Twitter will now all work from home. All employees will always work from home. There will be offices for them to come to if they want to, conference rooms for them to use if they need them, but they're expected to work from home from now on. And plenty of companies followed suit right away, even more. We're only at 16% now, but you can expect that number to skyrocket. I see that number going higher and higher and higher. This is an estimate that I think also will go higher and higher and higher. 40% of companies will have hybrid workers. What's a hybrid worker? A hybrid worker is one who works from home sometimes and works from the office at other times. Now, how do they decide where to work? It's whichever one makes more sense. I mean, not for nothing, but sometimes it makes sense to go to the office because there are resources there that you need to use. Sometimes it makes sense because there are people that you really want to get together with, and you feel the need to be in their presence so you can persuade them. Edward Hall defined a whole science of proxemics that talked about the impact it has depending on how close or far we stand from each other. How close are you to the person? You know, the concept of close talkers. Sometimes you feel the need to be a close talker, and you can't do that over video with a phone, so you go to the office. And you're disappointed when you find out the person you wanted to get close to stayed home. That'll happen. So 40% of companies say they'll have hybrid workers. They know they're going to. And the other 60% are going to find out that indeed they will, because the workers want to, their managers want to, that this number's going to rise. Bottom line. The bottom line is that remote work is here to stay. This is undeniable. We see it in the numbers. It makes sense. It made sense 28 years ago. It makes even more sense today. So remote work is here to stay. What are we going to see start to happen as we move into this new time? Well, the first one I've already kind of alluded to is the big quit, or the great resignation, as some people like to call it. I chose this visual because it's a positive visual. The message being that smoking can weaken your immune system, make you more susceptible to COVID, so you should quit now. It's a good time to quit smoking. But the big quit that we're talking about refers to people threatening that they're going to leave their job if they don't get to work from home anymore. They really like it. And in the Gallup poll, 54% of employees who are currently working remotely, at least some of the time, say they would ideally like to split their time between working at home and in the office. That's the definition of hybrid. More than half want to continue doing that. More than half admitted that they would prefer to do that. As a matter of fact, 37%, more than a third, said they just want to work from home. They don't want to go back to the office at all. And only 9% want to work in the office full time. My assumption is that 9% either have horrible marriages or young children who are very noisy. And I love young children who are very noisy, so don't think I don't. But that's the way the numbers lay out right now. And again, I expect that we're going to see more and more people prefer to work from home sometimes, at the office sometimes. It makes the most sense, the most flexibility, and people should have that kind of flexibility. That's that thing about taking a pay cut. USA Today found that half of workers they spoke to would be willing to take a pay cut of up to 5% if they could continue working remotely, at least part-time. Half. Think about that for a second. Half, and for those of you who are managers and employers, your employees, half of them would take a pay cut. Food for thought. 25% said they'd leave. If they couldn't work remotely, did leave. And as a matter of fact, last August, the first round of numbers came in. 4.3 million people did just that. That was the Great Resignation. That's where it began. People just leaving their jobs saying, no, if I can't work from home, I don't want to work here anymore, because there are plenty of companies that are willing to employ me and let me work from home. And as a matter of fact, then we go to the concept of the Zoom meetings or Teams meetings. A lot of people complaining, it's not the same when you're on video. Well, 70% of those surveyed by USA Today said they found them less stressful. They liked virtual meetings, much easier to handle. And if you manage them correctly, if you have a good protocol for keeping everybody from talking over each other, virtual meetings can be very productive because you don't really hang out and chew the fat afterwards. So anyway, interesting statistics, but 70% are happy with virtual meetings. Half of them would take a pay cut. So the big question becomes, how do we avoid the big quit? How do we keep our people from leaving us just because we won't let them work from home? And the answer is simple. That's the thing about this. It's a simple, straightforward answer, and the degree of difficulty in achieving it will vary. Your results may be different. Basically, what we want to do is give people what they need to be successful. If we're measuring based on what they need to be successful, well then, ostensibly, we don't care where they work. We just care that they get the work done. Let's dive a little bit deeper into this. The concept, and many of you probably experienced this in management school, they tell you to manage the whole person. You're not managing an employee. You're managing a human being. A human being has plenty more than just work problems. People are emotional. They have things going on in their lives, especially now with 900,000 people dying. That's 900,000 families that contain people with emotional duress. Some of them are very likely working for you. You need to be cognizant of that. You need to work with that. You need to help them in important ways. People have difficulty dealing with other people. They have interpersonal problems. And you need to play referee in some cases. You need to help people understand that they're communicating less effectively than they could. And perhaps you can help them with, be more effective. They have professional issues. They want to know, am I moving along my growth path? Some may have physical. Some may get sick themselves and need to deal with how do they keep their job while they're sick. They all want to make more money, so wealth is important to them. And they all have environmental and mental issues that they have to contend with. And the way they interact with their world. This is all part of managing. I mean, managing all of that is managing people. It's never been more important. And it's also never been more challenging because you won't be physically with them as much. So we really need to take a good hard look at that. And I suggest to you that the first way to do that is to see your company as a community. Going back to that slide we saw of the folks from Zoom having their party. Actually, that slide's coming up. You want people to feel that they're part of a community. You want people to feel that the people they work with are family, friends, on their side. And so you need to do everything you can to promote the concept of the company as community. That may take the form of company newsletters, company gatherings, or there's all kinds of possibilities. You also have to contend with that whole farmer's shadow thing and lose it. Here's some of the things that the executives have learned during this period of time. The first is that the most important element is trust. You have to trust that your employees are going to be working when they work from home, and they're not going to be goofing off, and they're not going to be doing something else. They're not going to be watching soap operas or football games or what have you. You need to be able to trust in that. And similarly, employees need to be able to trust their managers, that the managers will take care of them, that they'll continue to employ them even though they're working from home. Many people are afraid that if they're not there to lobby their manager, they're going to lose ground with their manager. That's got to go. They've got to be able to talk with you and know and feel confident that their employment will continue. Basically, this says that you need to manage the outcomes, not the clock. It's kind of a simple concept. If somebody clocked in at 9 and clocked out at 5 and sat there doing nothing all day, there are managers who would say, they clocked in, they clocked out, everything's good. Because they're not looking at what the employee did or did not do. Similarly, if they clocked in from home at 9, clocked out at 5, the manager doesn't know. It looks good. Still, there's no information there. If, on the other hand, the manager said, I need these outcomes from you today, and at the end of the day, that employee said, okay, I achieved those outcomes, the manager got what they asked for. If they didn't ask for enough, they'll ask for more tomorrow. You tend to adjust. But let's recognize that growth and success are not measured by time spent. They're measured by results. Quite frankly, it's the reason that I took the title Senior Resultant for myself. I'm all about results. I had people come tell me how hard they tried when I was a manager. And I appreciate the effort. It doesn't help me. Only results speak. They don't speak louder. They're the only thing that speak. So if we're managing results, if we're measuring results, that's the true reflection of what our people are doing. Now, what that means is that they need some way of telling us that they've achieved their results. And here's where we start to talk about technology. Workflow automation technology is fantastic. It's a great way to track the daily achievement of the goals you set for your people. It's also a good way to communicate those goals. They come to their workflow automation system, they get their assignments, they go about doing them, and they report their completions. Terrific. You get all the data you need. You even get some data about how long it took from beginning to end. So you can see how much time they're putting into it. And you can compare that from task to task, or you can compare it from person to person to see who your most productive, most efficient people are. It's all there. The data is all there. You just need to measure it and put away the time clock. Pull out the workflow automation system and see if you can't get what you really need working that way. They also learned 3 very important lessons that I want to make sure I emphasize during this session. Lesson number 1, celebrate often. Celebrate the great things your people do. And do that in public. Praise them publicly as you can. It's important that people feel good about the job they're doing. If your employees feel good, you're more than halfway to making your customers feel good. If the employee experience is great, you've got a much better chance of establishing a great customer experience. So that is something you desperately want to do. And the other part of that is criticize pragmatically. What do I mean? I mean, tell somebody, okay, what I needed you to accomplish was this, and you didn't accomplish that. Here's what you did that I don't think you should have done. You might have done better if you'd done it this way. Criticize the activity. Criticize what was done. It's a lot better than saying, you idiot, you failed me again. I think that's vivid enough. That's useless. That just sets people against you, and quite frankly, they should become part of that 54% who want to quit. That's just not a way to manage people. Okay, here we finally come to that slide that I was alluding to before. I love this picture. These are all employees of Zoom. This is a photograph from Zoom of a party that they held. So when we're, celebrating frequently, praising publicly, criticizing pragmatically, also party heartily. It's good to have your people come together and celebrate and feel good about each other and feel good about being a team. And there's nothing that replaces that. I heard recently about one of the popular online food service companies. They've introduced a new service. From one place, you can order lunch for as many people as you want in as many places as you want. So if you have locations all over the country, you can order lunch for everybody. They will coordinate delivering the lunches so they all basically arrive at pretty much the same time, in time for you to have a lunch meeting with everybody. You get them here on Zoom. They've all got lunch in front of them. Hey, let's have lunch together. I think that that's one of the most brilliant programs anybody's introduced during this horrible pandemic. So let's take advantage of it. Okay, this is the part I think you've all been waiting for, the part where we get to talk about the toys. I'm sorry, I didn't mean toys. I meant the tools. The tools and platforms that we're going to use to achieve all these things. Tools. Okay, first and foremost, I want to deal with the concept of best of breed versus best of platform. There's a big change we're undergoing right now. Those of us, anybody who's sitting out there who is a technologist, an engineer, knows you have tools that you love, tools you've been using probably for years. They are your favorites. They're your preferred tools to use. Unfortunately, the guy next to you may not know, or the gal next to you may not know how to use that tool. And if they're going to use it, you're going to have to teach them, or they're going to have to learn on their own. And then if you're using another tool, you have to learn that tool. And another, you have to learn that tool. Before long, you're taking a lot of training and getting support from a lot of different places. It's all kind of disconnected, disjointed. And inevitably, you end up creating cracks through which things can slip. And over time, recently, we realized even if the tools are the best of breed each, that's not the best possible solution in a production environment. The better solution is a platform that brings together all the tools you need to accomplish a certain thing, like managing the network or managing workflow or what have you. Best of platform means some of the tools may not be your favorite, but they're perfectly usable. And the best news is they're seamless. They're built to be integrated. They're integrated by nature. And so my recommendation is start looking for best of platform rather than continuing to identify best of breed tools. For those of you who are open platform houses, open source houses, yeah, I know this is like against your religion, and I apologize for that. But the reality is that we're seeing people at all levels of experience. And they're joining, and especially now with 4 million job recs open around the world for IT people, we need to be in a condition where new people can come in and learn how to fix everything in one training, one support operation. So look for best of platform rather than best of breed. In space, no one can hear use for you. No. In the cloud, everyone is equal. Now, those of you who had people working from home and working in the office know that the people in the office had direct connection to the LAN, the local area network. They got terrific response times. People out there on the LAN, it really depended on how they were accessing. Over the internet, there's latency, there's all kinds of unpredictability. Even on long lines, it's going to take longer. They're going to get a slower response than they did in the office. Now, of course, everybody's remote. Everybody gets the same responsiveness. So the name of the game is improve that responsiveness and float all boats, right? All boats rise. And there are many ways we're going to do that. Again, companies we've spoken to that were already in the cloud, using the cloud extensively, had a much easier time back in March of 2020 making their migration to work from home. In the cloud, everyone needs equal protection. Well, we need to keep them all secure at every level. That means that authentication has to improve. It means that encryption has to improve, firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, everything that we do to secure our data and our networks and our people has to work similarly for everybody. For that reason, we're seeing the emergence of SASE, right? Secure Access Service Edge, where we've combined both the network operation and the security operation into one. SASE brings together all the best of networking and all the best of security. It starts with software-defined wide area networking, and it includes things like bandwidth aggregation from various different kinds of circuits so that you're using the most cost-effective route every time. It uses multiple networking vendors, so you have redundancy. If one fails, you still can fail over to another. You're seeing everything as a service, firewall as a service, network as a service. You're seeing, well, what you're seeing mainly, like I said, SD-WAN, zero trust, where nothing is trusted. Everything must prove itself. Everything must confirm itself. Zero trust also no longer focuses only on IP addresses and other technical specifications. Now there's real focus on who is accessing the network and what device are they using. Both must be verified before they can connect to the network. And that's got a lot more powerful, serious implications than simply checking IP addresses, which can be spoofed. We're using cloud access security brokers. We'd better be using multi-factor authentication. There's no reason not to anymore. You don't have to buy a bunch of little fobs to do it. Everybody's doing it with their mobile phone, and it makes all the sense in the world. And we're using secure web gateways. The message here is that everything we're doing is designed for distributed computing, people being wherever they are, under centralized control so that you're not duplicating everything all over the place. That would be unmanageable. Now, central control, distributed computing, we're preparing for a world in which everybody may be working from somewhere other than corporate headquarters. No discussion of this would be complete without at least a mention of 5G. I would refresh and remind everybody. 5G is not 5G is not 5G. The way that AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, the way they each approach 5G is somewhat different from each other. So you're going to see different deployments. You're going to see different services, different availabilities. You're going to need to get to work harder to get a good definition of what you're getting. They're already offering 5G home internet, meaning they're going to put you on a MiFi, right? There's a lot to be learned, but what is promised is increased bandwidth, which is great, increased speed, which is great, and elimination of latency. So if any of you are planning on getting a self-driven car, an autonomic vehicle, this is important. Because if your autonomic vehicle suddenly loses connection in the midst of a left turn, that's what we call an accident, or in the Midwest, a wreck, a crash. It's not a good thing. Elimination of latency has a lot of implications to it, and we're going to see those start to roll out as the next few years go by and 5G matures, the same way that 4G LTE matured. It took a long time. Remember that it took a long time, and be patient with 5G as it comes out. When it does, we can look forward to incredible improvements in things like artificial intelligence. The responsiveness of artificial intelligence will be completely redefined in a world with more bandwidth and no latency. Mobility will be completely redefined. There's no reason to think you're going to have poor performance anywhere as 5G matures. And of course, we're going to see a redefinition of the Internet of Things. All those millions and billions of sensors and switches and whatnot, they're going to have even better access, faster access, more responsiveness. We're going to see new applications coming out because we can do them now where we couldn't do them before. So 5G's on its way. Be patient, and let's see just how it rolls out. Which brings us finally to applications. And the first and foremost one I want to talk about is workflow automation. Okay, this is what we're going to use to allow everybody working from wherever they are to get their assignments and to report on their completion of their assignments so we can measure everything they're doing without having to physically be there casting a shadow over them. We're also going to see an explosion of low-code, no-code. Okay, most people are allergic to the idea of coding. Those of you who are developers, you know it's wonderful, gives you unbelievable capability, flexibility. There's more great stuff coming all the time, but the typical person does not want to have to contend with that. They should be in an environment where if they know their work process, they can interpret that work process into a low-code, no-code application simply by shifting tiles around an interface on the screen. No coding or very little coding at all. And if you think this is isolated, if you think this is kind of like a remote thing that's just kind of happening here and there, these are only some of the products that are emerging that allow you to do low code, no code. There are tons more. I couldn't fit them all on the screen. This is big. And this is something that if you haven't started exploring it, you probably want to do so now because it's going to put a lot more power into your hands in terms of what your technology can do for you. Think of a self-styled digital transformation every day. Fun. Then we get to that popularly referred to collaboration. This being the model, we want to see everybody on the same page, contributing their ideas and their creativity, and that's what it should look like. And there are plenty of products out there and more emerging all the time. Popular ones include Microsoft Teams, which Microsoft is doing what it always does. It's cramming more and more functionality all the time. You've got to keep up with it. You've got to keep up with the complexity that it creates. There's more training to be had. But, with great power comes great responsibility. Thank you, Uncle Ben. Zoom jumped into popularity with the pandemic, and they just keep on growing and growing their platform. Other platforms like RingCentral are continuing to expand the UCaaS universe, as is 8x8 and Nextiva and many, many others. So these are all saying they all work together. Explore those integrations. Remember to always include something that gives you a productivity suite. Google Workplace is a good example, Microsoft 365. Again, integration is key. If all your applications are naturally integrated, it's easier to make things work together to give you more capability than you'd have otherwise. There are also many platforms like Trello or Monday or Workforce or Slack that allow you to manage people's productivity and manage their projects, manage their activity. So there are great applications enabling all kinds of collaboration to take place. Finally, I'm going to break down and get back to toys. Yeah, I did kind of mean it. The toys are pretty cool, and the toys that are emerging are even cooler. This is what we look like right now, right? This is your typical user. He's got his one hand on his mouse, got a keyboard in front of him, he's got a monitor, he's got his tablet laying there on the and those look like game cartridges, but I won't say anything. This is a typical user. Comfy chair, some audio. Terrific. What a great place to work. It's going to get better. Even now, virtual reality replaces reality. Put on the headset, like a Meta Quest 2 headset, good example. Those of us in the business interpret that to be Facebook Quest 2. You put the headset on and reality goes away, replaced with a completely different reality, other than the one you're used to. And you can be in a war zone. You can be in space. You could be on a roller coaster. You could be on the beach just by putting on the headset. Then there's augmented reality. Augmented reality basically puts digital information on top of the real world. So you can look at a street through your mobile device, and you can see buttons that show you where everything is. There's a watch shop ahead of you and a restaurant. You can click on those and see the menu for that restaurant or the menu for that coffee shop. More information about each of these places. Augmented reality imposes digital content on your real world. Now, that may not strike you as a very practical application, but this will. Tony Stark, Iron Man's advisor, right? Tony Stark is in there. He has targeting available to him, threat assessment. He sees what kind of weapons are being tossed at him. He can evaluate things going on in the atmosphere. All that data presented to him as he flies. Now, which of us doesn't want to have that functionality? And then finally, there's mixed reality. Mixed reality adds digital, virtual elements to the real world, but these are now elements you can interact with. This engineer, for example, is rotating this motor in space in front of him, even though it's not there. So he can see where things might bind or things might jam. It improves his ability to detect problems before they happen. So mixed reality, you've got things in the world that you can move around. It is conceivable that mixed reality may replace monitors someday, where you can have as many monitors as you want. You just create them in front of you using your visor. There's a lot coming, and it really depends on who's developing what. Ultimately, hopefully, by the time the Jedi become popular, we will have the ability to attend meetings as an astral projection. This is a Jedi Council meeting, and of course, one person, I don't know what he is, couldn't make it, so he showed up virtually as a hologram. This is already possible. This is already happening. So look forward to it becoming popularly available very soon. And then finally, there's the concept of spare parts. Parts is parts, right? This is an ocular and an auditory implant, something that is surgically implanted into your head, connects to your auditory and ocular nerve, and lets you see and hear things that are sent to you digitally. You don't need a monitor. You don't need a visor. You don't need a headset. It's all there. This is also in use today and will be popularly available pretty soon. And of course, hearing and sight are not the only things we can today augment. There's a variety of other things. Okay, we can insert all kinds of things into the human body to assist various important functions. Artificial legs, artificial limbs, an artificial heart, an RFID tag so you can identify somebody simply by scanning them, automated drug delivery so that they don't have to worry about taking their pills every morning, bionic eyes, so yeah, you can be this $6 million person, all kinds of things. Now, some of you are sitting there saying, oh, come on, this is silly. It's not silly. This visual comes from the Institute of Electric and Electronic Engineers, the IEEE, the de facto authority on all things technology, advancing technology for humanity. This is their graphic. This is their projection of the very near future. With that, we still have a couple of minutes. John, if you have any questions, boy, I'd love to answer them.
Sure. Thank you, Howard. Party heartily. Good to know something I learned in college as real-world application. So we're going to get to the questions now. There's just a little bit of time here, but you can take your questions into the Q&A box at any time. We'll do our best to get to all of them. Let's see. Here's one from David, and he's wondering how recent is this data for flex jobs? It seems like as time goes on, some of the attitudes have changed.
Well, this is about a year old, and I was not able to find a more recent survey, but circa about a year ago, and I agree with you, David. I think that, this is going to change daily. So this was the best that I could pull for this presentation, but there'll be updates all the time.
Okay, here's another one from Victoria. Are there any downsides to hiring people from faraway places if you don't expect them to come into the office?
Okay, I'm the wrong guy to ask. I've been hiring people from faraway places for decades. Seriously, I've been using remote tools to manage customer networks since 1998. It's a long time. We always use remote tools, and we always hired people wherever they happen to be, because it's their knowledge, that we're looking for. It's not their physical presence. And if you think about if any of you watched the Star Trek Picard series on Paramount, they just turned him into a digital being with all of Picard's memories and processing capabilities. That's not far off. That was first introduced in Battlestar Galactica, the newer series. It's not pie in the sky. We're getting very close to the point where we can basically copy your memory, which I'm told is only about 300 gigabytes, and your processing capability into silicon. Once we can go from carbon to silicon, all bets are off. But even now, I don't think you need a person to be there to do knowledge work, informational work. If there's physical work involved, obviously they have to be where you are.
Howard, I think we're out of time here. That was an information-packed session. I appreciate everybody's input. We're going to take a short break now. Thank you, Howard M. Cohen, for a great session. And our sponsors, Martello, Splashtop, Okta, RingCentral, and Smarsh for making it possible. We're going to take a short break, be back right around the top of the hour, probably just a few minutes after, for our second session, New Remote Workforce Best Practices for 2022, presented by scientist, author, and 20-time Microsoft MVP, Brian Posey, and moderated by my colleague, Converge 360 Associate Web Editor and winner of our last company-wide trivia game, Chris Paoli. Beat me by a hair. I know it's going to be another informative session, so stay tuned. Now would be a good time to check out those resources on your console provided by our sponsors. And remember, during today's third session, we will be giving away a pair of AirPods Max, Apple's high-end wireless over-ear headphones. So stay tuned. Bye for now.
welcome back to our second session. Chris, please take it away.
Thanks. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our speakers, my fellow moderators, and of course our sponsors, Martello, Splashtop, Okta, RingCentral, and Smarsh for underwriting this summit and allowing us to bring you this great content. My name is Chris Paoli, Associate Editor, and I am here to moderate the second session of our What's Ahead for Your Remote Workforce in 2022 Summit. This session is called New Remote Workforce Best Practices for 2022. Our speaker for this session is Brian Posey, Microsoft's MVP and technology writer. Brian Posey is a freelance technology author and a 20-time Microsoft MVP. Throughout his career, Brian has written or contributed to dozens of IT books, has created numerous full-length video training courses, and has published thousands of blog posts on a huge variety of IT and space-related topics. Many of these blog posts can be found in his Posey's Tips and Tricks column or in his new Posey's Moonshot column, both found on redmondmag.com. Take it away, Brian.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. So, whereas the previous presentation covered the future of remote work and all of the things that we might expect in the not-too-distant future, my presentation is going to focus more on the here and now. So, in other words, what is the state of the world? What's the state of remote work? And what should we be doing differently than what we're doing at the moment? So I've got a ton of information that I'm going to try to present in this session, and a lot of this is based on my own personal experiences. So it should be a fun session. So one of the big takeaways that I want to convey is that the pandemic will eventually run its course. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Because if you look back at history, every plague, no matter how bad it was, did eventually run its course at some point. That was true for the Black Death that ravaged Europe back in the Middle Ages. It was true for the Spanish flu 100 years ago. And this will end too at some point in time. Having said that, though, what may not end is remote work. And there are any number of reasons for that. One of the big reasons is that a lot of users probably prefer working from home, I myself included. I walked away from my corporate job way back in 2000, and I've been working from home for the last 22 years. And if I'm to be totally honest with you, I cannot imagine ever going back to a situation where I have to work in an office each day. Working from home is great. You know, there's no putting on the dress clothes, there's no commute to deal with, and there are any number of other advantages, not to mention that it's more easy to deal with the distractions of day-to-day life. You don't have to worry if somebody needs to be there to sign for a package or if you've got to be there to let a plumber in or something like that. If you're working from home, those types of things become a non-issue. So working from home definitely has its advantages. No, it's not perfect. There are advantages to going to the office as well. But I think when all is said and done, there are going to be an awful lot of people that really prefer to continue to work from home. Now, it's not just the users who can benefit from work from home. It's also businesses. And there are a couple of ways of looking at this. One thing is that back in 2020, when the world shut down, businesses invested a lot of money and a lot of resources in remote access technologies that would allow users to work from home. And they're not going to be anxious to walk away from that investment just because the world is slowly starting to go back to normal. They're going to want to capitalize and see a return on that investment that they made. So I don't really see businesses walking away from their remote access technologies. Another thing to look at from a business perspective is that companies are starting to realize how much money they're saving by utilizing remote work. Not only does it cut down on employee absenteeism, there's also things like reduced use of utilities that businesses are no longer having to pay for because users aren't in the office. Also, a lot of organizations have completely eliminated their physical real estate presence, so they've unleashed themselves from an expensive lease on a commercial property. So businesses are saving a fortune, thereby making them more profitable and enticing them to continue the remote work trend. So all of that is to say that I really don't think that remote work is going to go anywhere, at least not anytime soon. So that being the case, I think that it makes a lot of sense to take a step back and take a look at what's working with regard to remote work and what maybe we could be doing better. Now, one of the things that I wanted to point out about remote work is that, yes, it's been a major disruptor for IT, especially given how suddenly it was sprung on all of us. But it's certainly not the only disruptor. The entire history of IT has been filled with one disruptor after another, and it really seems like that's kind of accelerated over about the last 15 or 20 years. I've listed a few of the more major disruptors on the slide, things like the so-called bring your own device revolution, the transition to the cloud, the .com revolution, wireless networking. I know that sounds weird as a disruptor, but that's one of those things I'm going to talk a little bit more about later on. Server virtualization, and the list goes on and on. Now, the important thing to keep in mind with these, and something I'm sure that anybody who is involved in any of these trends will remember, is that it didn't go smoothly at first. There were some road bumps along the way, and maybe it took a couple of tries to really get it right and to form policies and that sort of thing that made these particular transitions practical. So, as I said a moment ago, the key thing to do right now is to just kind of take a step back and see what's working and what maybe we need to be doing something different about. Because when the pandemic first happened, the world shut down seemingly overnight. Realistically, it was probably more like a week. But the directive toward a lot of IT people was just make it work. I don't care how you do it, just make it work and get it done quick. And I like to think that the IT community delivered on that. We really pulled off something amazing, and anybody who was directly involved in that, you should congratulate yourself. Now, having said that, remote work solutions were put into place hastily, out of a matter of necessity. I mean, granted, most organizations already had some remote capabilities, but those had to be scaled up very, very rapidly. The thing about it is, at the time, nobody really cared because everybody expected the whole remote work thing to be temporary. But now, it seems like remote work, or at the very least hybrid work, is here to stay for a while. So it's really important to take a step back and consider what works and what doesn't. So what types of things should you be looking at? Well, honestly, probably everything. But to be more practical, some of the things that you should be considering are user satisfaction, which seems like a weird thing to put at the top of the list, but in my mind, it's one of the most important things because your users are the ones who actually do the company's work. And if they're not happy, the company just really doesn't run all that well. So it's important to keep your users happy. So user satisfaction is an important thing to look at. Other important things to look at might include security, support, compliance, data backups, and work-life balance. And I'm going to be delving into all of these a little bit more as we go along, some a little bit deeper than others. And at the bottom of the slide, you'll notice that I've got any other area where IT has influence or authority. That one's a bit vague, admittedly, but it kind of falls into the category of every organization is different. Every organization has its own way of doing things. So there might be some things that are unique to your organization that wouldn't necessarily make it onto my list. This is just an acknowledgement of that you should take a look at any aspect that IT has a lot of control over and just see if it's really living up to what it needs to be able to do. So with that said, let's turn our attention toward user satisfaction. When it comes to measuring user satisfaction and ensuring that the users are happy, there are a number of questions that need to be considered. The very first question on the list is, do the users have what they need in order to do their jobs? So this might be anything from computing hardware to a decent internet connection or what have you. It's just important to make sure that the users have what they need and that if there is some need that's not being met, that something's done to address that need. Another question, is remote work getting in the way of productivity? So, in other words, were users able to work more efficiently when they were at the office, or are they working more efficiently at home? Now, if it's the former and users were more efficient when they were at the office, then the big question becomes, what can we be doing to ensure that users work just as efficiently at their home office, assuming that you want to continue on with remote work? And that's actually a point that I'm going to be coming back to in a few slides. The next question on the list, is the solution worse than the problem? And I've seen so many examples of this as the time has gone on. For example, people who really didn't attend that many meetings when they were working on site, but now it seems like they're so bombarded with one Zoom meeting after another, that it's hard for them to even find time to get their work done because they're tied up in meetings all day long, whereas before the pandemic, meetings were a rarity. So you have to consider, is the solution worse than the problem? And if so, what can be done to remedy that? And then the last point on the slide, and this one's kind of a personal pet peeve of mine, is the technology being used in an abusive way? Is it being used to spy on users or to regulate a user's home office layout or things like that? There have been so many examples of this. I'm not going to call anybody out specifically, but there was one organization that got caught using webcams to spy on users while they were at home. There was another organization that I read about a while back, and for the life of me, I can't remember who it was, that was actually trying to craft HR policy around users' homes. So they were trying to control things like how much square footage you have to dedicate to your home office, what types of items you're required to have in your home, what you're not allowed to have in your home, how high your desk is supposed to be, and the list goes on with all these insidious regulations. So those are just a few things to think about with regard to user satisfaction. So what about some best practices? Because this session is, after all, new remote workforce best practices for 2022. Well, one best practice is to ask the users for feedback, but don't pester them with endless surveys. So I think that most users probably like being occasionally asked what they think about things, especially if they honestly believe that change may result from things that aren't working for them. But that feedback really loses its meaning if you don't listen, or if you're just constantly bombarding users with surveys and opinion questions and things like that. Because it's one thing to maybe get a survey a couple of times a year. It's another thing entirely to get a survey every single week or every few days, asking the same things that the users have already been asked over and over and over again. I remember doing a research project in college that involved having to send out a few series of surveys. And when I sent out the first round, I got tons of responses, but as time went on, I got fewer and fewer responses, presumably because people were getting tired of all of the questioning. The second point on the slide is actually listen to what the users are telling you, even if it isn't what you want to hear. Again, I'm not going to go too deeply into this one, but I will say that I once worked for an organization that used user feedback as a way to justify whatever it was that they were planning on doing anyway. And if the users suggested something that was counter to that, then they just ignored that feedback and pretended it never happened. That's obviously a terrible way to run a business. So if you're going to ask users for feedback, then take to heart whatever it is that they suggest, even if it isn't necessarily what you were expecting or what you wanted to hear. And then the last point on the slide is don't neglect one-off situations. And by one-off situations, I'm talking about special needs that maybe only apply to one user or a handful of users or something like that. And I'll give you a really personal example of that. Early in my IT career, I worked as a network admin for a large insurance company. And back then, this was the mid-'90s, the process of creating user accounts and provisioning new users and all that was a completely manual process. Well, in the insurance industry, there's something called open enrollments, and that's a time of year when people are allowed to make changes to their policies. And it's a really busy period. The company in question was hiring hundreds and hundreds of temp workers to handle the open enrollment demand. And so naturally, the IT department had to create user accounts for all of those users. So because it was a manual process, it was a monumental effort. It involved a couple of days of us doing nothing but creating one user account after another after another. And at the time, me being in my early 20s at the time, I was into a lot of extreme sports, and without going into too much detail, I had broken my arm pretty badly and had just gotten out of a cast. And typing was pretty painful at that point. Well, the organization ended up getting me a special ergonomic keyboard that greatly alleviated some of that pain. And even though I could have done the job with a regular keyboard, having that special keyboard made me so much more productive than I would have been with a regular keyboard because it helped me to be able to type more quickly. So all of that is to say don't neglect those special one-off situations when it comes to user satisfaction. Sometimes a small gesture like that can really go a long way. So what are some more best practices? Well, one best practice is to consider, do the users want to use their own hardware? Users tend to know what works best for their own productivity. And if a user has a particular device form factor that they want to work from, then there's a very good chance that that's going to help them. Now, of course, the opposite can be true. We all know that there are some device form factors that really don't work well towards certain job situations. For example, if you've got a user who is responsible for data entry, you probably don't want them working from a touch keyboard on a smartphone all day long. That's probably not going to be the most efficient way of them working. Another consideration is the user-supplied hardware up to the job? Now, this one has implications both with support and with security. From a security perspective, there are certain older devices that just can't be hardened quite the way that some of the newer ones are. So that's an important consideration. But you also have to think about what this is going to do to your support department. There are some devices that realistically you just can't support. To give you another personal example, a couple of years ago, I had a friend who really isn't into computers at all and doesn't really know anything about them. They called me and told me, hey, I just bought my first computer. Can you come over and help me set it up? So we worked out a time. I went over to their house, and they ended up buying, and I kid you not, they got a 286 at a yard sale and wanted to begin using it to get on the internet and do all kinds of other fun things. So that was an example of a support situation in which aging hardware just wasn't up to the job. So another question, does the user have adequate internet access? And if not, why? Well, if you find that a user doesn't have adequate internet access, it could be that it's simply just a matter of budgeting. Maybe the user doesn't have the household budget for a decent internet package, and that might be something that the organization can help with. On the other hand, it's equally possible that the user lives in an area where something like that just isn't available. That was actually the case for me for quite some time. Up until maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I kind of lost track of the time, but the area where I live is serviced by a rural carrier, and they're the only option for internet. And I was limited to 384 kilobits per second of internet connectivity speed up until really just a few years ago. So there was no other option at that time. So what about some more best practices? Well, a moment ago, I had made the point that one of the things that you have to consider is whether remote work is getting in the way of the user's productivity, if they would normally be more productive in the office. And if that's the case, what you can do to make the remote environment more conducive to the user being able to efficiently work. Well, one of the best practices that I kind of take along with that is to remember any productivity lessons that you might have learned while working on the road. Now, I know some people travel a lot more than others. And in my own life, I'm one of those people that travels constantly, or especially before the pandemic, but even today, I still tend to travel quite a bit. Some of that is for spaceflight training, some of it's for IT events, some of it's personal. Either way, there's a lot of travel, and very often I find myself having to work on the road. And one of the lessons that really sticks out in my mind is that when I'm at home, I have a desk that I've got set up where I've got quite a few monitors just wrapped around me, basically, and it allows me to work very efficiently because I can have different things on different monitors. And I've realized that when I travel, just having a laptop doesn't let me work anywhere nearly as efficiently as I normally would. Well, the last time that Microsoft had its Ignite conference in person, I realized that I had a lot of content that was due that week, but I still had to attend the conference, so I needed to force myself to work as efficiently as I could, even though I was going to be doing that work from a hotel room. So I actually brought along a couple of external monitors and a docking station for my laptop, and I made the setup as similar as I could to what I have at home. And yes, it was a pain to have to drag all that in from the car and set it up in a hotel room, but ultimately that extra effort really paid off in terms of productivity. It did exactly what I needed it to. So this is an example of what I am talking about productivity lessons that may have been learned from the road. So consider things that you may have had to have done when you're working in a less than optimal environment to boost your own productivity, and maybe some of those same techniques or variations of them can be applied to your end users. So let's transition and talk a little bit about support. Now, support could easily be lumped in with user satisfaction, but there are aspects of support that are kind of unique, so I wanted to address that as a completely separate category. One of the big things to keep in mind with support is that remote work has completely done away with conventional office hours. Users tend to work at all hours of the day or at night, and so it's important to make sure that support is available at the times when the users are working, even if that's 24/7. But another consideration is that after-hour support can't be subpar. It needs to be just as good as what's available during the day. I can think of incidents where I've had to call a support line late at night because of something that I'm working on, and I've had people tell me, oh, you'll have to wait for the day shift because only they have access to do such and such, or things like that. And it's infuriating when you're trying to get a job done and support can't help you because they don't have the necessary knowledge or authority to do what it is that you need done. So the big takeaway there is that after-hour support needs to be just as good as the support that you have during business hours. And also, you don't want to put your IT staff in a situation where they have to field support calls in the middle of the night. Let them work during their shift and have somebody else late at night. I can't help but think about when I was in college. I was going to school full-time and working full-time in IT. And usually by the time all of that was done, it was about 11 o'clock at night before I got home. And I can remember a few times getting home and having messages on my answering machine. Hey, we need you to come back in when you get done with school because so-and-so's computer needs attention. And believe me when I say that was no fun at all. So just make sure that support is adequately covered. And it looks like one slide accidentally got duplicated and one of my slides is missing, but the point that I had intended to make on this slide was that when it comes to support, you also need to think about security, because if you've got users working remotely, you need a way of authenticating that they are who they claim to be once they contact your support department. Now, organizations have adopted all different ways of doing this. For example, a lot of organizations will ask the caller a security question, or they might send a code to their smartphone and have them verify the code or something like that. And that's all a good start. But one of the important things to consider is that you have to be smart about the way that you authenticate a user's identity when they call the support desk. Because you don't want to accidentally authenticate somebody who's trying to use a social engineering scam as a way of gaining access to your organization. But you also don't want to give the help desk technician too much information or more authority than they really need. So one example of that is, let's suppose that an organization uses a security challenge question to verify a user. So the user calls into the help desk. The technician asks them their challenge question. They give them the answer. Well, at that point, that technician knows the answer to that user's question. Might not necessarily be a big deal in every situation, but think about other ways in which that information could be put to work. So you've got to be able to trust your help desk technicians, but you also have to be really smart about the types of information that you put in their hands. So let's talk a little bit about security. One of the things about remote work is that it's drastically changed the threat landscape. Now, some of the threats that we're facing today have been there for a long time, but there may also be some new ones. One example of a threat that's been around for a long time is ransomware, but it's drastically increased in this day and age of remote work. I saw something a few days ago that in 2020, after all of the lockdowns and everything, that successful ransomware attacks had increased by 150% that year. And there were an estimated 67,000 successful ransomware attacks, I believe it said. And I've also seen statistics for last year. Now, admittedly, some of these statistics are contradictory from one another, so I'm not really sure which one is right. But they all point to the same basic thing, that ransomware attacks have increased dramatically last year, even over the year before, which was a big increase over the year before that. The point being that remote work has increased a number of different security threats, and those threats have to be taken seriously. So you're going to need to adapt your security accordingly. So the number one best practice that I could give you with regard to this is to completely disregard the idea of the network perimeter. Because if you think about it, in the old days of IT, we all worked in these environments where everything was confined within four walls. All of our devices were domain-joined desktops that never left the organization. Our servers were right there in the data center on site, and our users came into the building to work. So if we could keep the bad guys from penetrating those four walls, we were doing a really good job with security. Today, that concept is null and void. It just doesn't work anymore. Because if you think about it, devices are mobile, users are working from home, and most of our applications are running in the cloud, not in the corporate data center. So the perimeter has completely evaporated. So we need new ways to look at defenses. Two recommendations that I would make is, one, move toward a zero trust model. That's something that hopefully you're already doing, but zero trust is one of those things where it's more of an idea than, say, a product or a procedure or something like that. There are always ways that you can improve upon your existing zero trust initiatives. So continually be looking for ways of doing that. The other recommendation would be to center your defenses around the idea of identity, because really user identity is the only constant that we have these days. Devices change, applications change, locations change, but a user's identity is one thing that follows them no matter what device they're using, what application they're using, and where they're working from. So look for ways of centering your defenses around identity, at least to the largest extent possible. Another best practice is to take steps to learn from the past. Now, I mentioned that a couple of those disruptors that I had mentioned on one of the earlier slides were things that I was going to come back to and talk about in a little bit more detail later on. And the ones that I want to talk about are Wi-Fi and bring your own device. Those might seem like some strange things to talk about with regard to remote work, but there were some lessons learned from both of those that I think are very applicable to today. So Wi-Fi and bring your own device were both big-time disruptors, and they had similarities to what we're going through. In both cases, shadow IT was a huge problem, and the solution ended up being to give the users what they wanted, but to do it in a very controlled way so that IT can maintain security. Now, shadow IT, for anybody who's not familiar with the term, is basically the idea of a user circumventing the IT department. Because if a user has a job to do and IT is putting all of these barriers in their place, making it harder for the user to do their job, then the user is just going to find another way to get it done. They're going to go around IT and use something unauthorized. So shadow IT is one of those things that we want to prevent if at all possible. And Wi-Fi and bring your own device were both major contributors to shadow IT back in the day. Wi-Fi, when it first came out, or maybe not when it first came out because it was really expensive and difficult to set up when it first came out, but once it went mainstream, I couldn't tell you how many stories I heard of organizations saying, no, we're not going to use Wi-Fi because it's not secure. And users would just go to the electronics store, spend however much, get an access point, and plug it into a network jack under their desk, and IT was none the wiser. So they had Wi-Fi. They just didn't know they had Wi-Fi. So that was an example of shadow IT. And the same thing largely happened with bring your own device. I heard stories back in the day of particularly executives buying a shiny new iPad and figuring out how to connect it to the network and accessing resources without IT even really knowing about it. So both of those trends presented major challenges, and they forced IT to stop and rethink how they did things. Now, in the case of Wi-Fi, the solution was to treat Wi-Fi networks as untrusted. Again, we're back to the whole zero trust thing. It was also an early indicator that the network perimeter was probably not going to be a fixture that was there to stay forever and ever. And this was really a radical transition in ways of thinking because prior to the adoption of Wi-Fi, a lot of organizations would go to extreme lengths to ensure the security of their perimeter network. One of the organizations that I worked for example, actually would go around and any jacks for plugging a computer into the network that existed, if those jacks weren't actively being used, they would go in and cut the wires just so that somebody couldn't go out to some far off corner of the building, plug in, and access the network. So it was kind of an extreme thing to do for the sake of physical security, but this particular organization felt the need. And bring your own device was similarly disruptive. As I mentioned a moment ago, a lot of people would go out, buy their own devices, and then try to access business resources with them, even if they weren't necessarily allowed to do so. So organizations ended up getting around that particular problem by basically embracing bring your own device. And they essentially told users, okay, you can use whatever device you want, but there are going to be some rules around that device usage. We're going to limit the types of devices that you can use. Maybe we're going to place some limits on what types of resources you can access from those devices. So we're going to do it in a controlled way, but you can use that particular device. Now, supportability is also another big takeaway from that because some organizations struggled early on with supporting all of these bring your own devices. You had help desk technicians who had only ever supported a Windows PC suddenly being asked to support iPads when maybe they had never touched an iPad in their life. So supportability was definitely one of those road bumps that came about along the way. So what are some examples of some of those bring your own device policy items? Well, one was that devices had to be enrolled, and that subjects them to configuration policies. Another was that maybe devices can't be jailbroken. A lot of organizations also put into place policies saying that lost or stolen devices have to be reported so that those devices can be remotely wiped. And then some organizations also put policies into place saying that any personal content stored on the device was subject to company policies. Now, that kind of falls into one of those gray areas. I don't want to get into that one too much, but it is just an example of a bring your own device policy item. And certainly these aren't the only ones. They're just a few examples of some of the more common ones. So how does any of that apply to what we're doing today? Well, even though we're not necessarily struggling with bring your own device and Wi-Fi, because those are things that we've all dealt with in the distant past, there are some lessons that were learned back then that can be applied today. Lesson number one is to look for ways to remove barriers that lead to shadow IT. Because remember, you don't want your users going around the IT department, especially if you're in a regulated organization that has to do things a certain way for the sake of compliance. So it's really important to look for things that maybe are stumbling blocks to users or that get in the user's way of being able to do their job in the way that they want to do it. And look for ways of removing those so that you minimize the chances of shadow IT taking place. Another lesson learned back then that can be applied today is to take steps to future-proof your remote work policy. Because one of the things that we've learned is that device types change over time. I mentioned the 286 that somebody bought at a yard sale. That's an example of a device type changing over time. Locations change. Users were previously working in the office. Now they're typically working from home. Applications change, so everything changes. So look for ways as you build out these policies to future-proof the policy so that you don't have to go back and revise them later. Since I've got a few minutes, I'll give you an example of a really insidious example of this. One of the I'll just go ahead and say, back when I was with the military, there were some, and I'm having to be careful here because a lot of what I did was classified, so I'm having to be intentionally vague. But when this particular unit in the military purchased computer hardware, there were a list of requirements that those pieces of hardware had to adhere to, a checklist, if you will. It has to have this processor, this much memory, and so on and so forth. Well, one of the items that was listed on that list of requirements was something that eventually went away. So the military ended up having to pay extra money to get PCs that were out of date simply because they wanted to be able to meet that requirement that was listed on a checklist somewhere. So that's an example of something that wasn't future-proof. So the lesson here is that as you design these policies, try to avoid doing anything like that would make them non-future-proof. Another recommendation that I would give you is to document your procedures for vetting applications. Because if applications change over time, then your users are inevitably going to want to use something different down the road. And you don't want to have to just deal with that on the fly as those challenges come. It's better to have a procedure already in place for vetting an application and deciding which applications make the cut versus which ones don't. Another best practice is to consider whether users should be allowed to grant data access permissions to applications. So a user gets an application, they install it themselves on their own personal device, and that application asks for permission to do various things, maybe to access the webcam, the microphone, and oh, by the way, it also wants to access your data. Well, you, as an IT person in whatever organization you work for, have an interest in ensuring the security of that data. So do you really want some random application that a user installs to be able to access your company data? Maybe there is a business use case for that, but maybe that's not something that you want to do. So that's one of those things that you should be looking at right now. And incidentally, there are controls that exist inside of Azure Active Directory that can be used to prevent user-installed applications from accessing that data. Another best practice is to use a unified tool for managing all of your endpoints, not a per-device type solution. Now, when I say a per-device type solution, I'm not talking about one of these where you have to have one tool for iPads, another for Android devices, another tool for Windows PCs. Certainly that's something you want to avoid, but I think as a whole the world has moved past that quite some time ago. What I'm talking about is a management solution that has equal capabilities for each platform. Early on, when mobile devices in the corporate world first became really widespread, a lot of organizations tried to use ActiveSync policies. as a way of securing those devices. Now, if you're not familiar with ActiveSync policies, they were something that came with Microsoft Exchange. And the idea was that a user could link a mobile device to their Exchange email box, and these ActiveSync policies could be used to harden that device. They could do things like requiring the device to have a password. They could disable Bluetooth on the device or shut down the device camera. There were quite a few policies that you could pick and choose from so that you could configure the device in a way that made sense for your own organization's needs. So one of the interesting things about that, though, is that even though most of the devices that were in use at that point in time supported ActiveSync, they all did so to varying degrees. And Microsoft actually had this great big long matrix on one of their web pages that listed operating system versus which ActiveSync policies did and did not work on that particular device type. So all of this is to say that you want to avoid one of these solutions that offers better support for some platforms than others. Try to find a unified solution if you don't already have one that will allow you to manage all of these devices in an equal way. So another best practice is to look for ways to expedite the adoption of new governance and procedures that benefit the end users. Benefit the end users is key here, because one of the things that I've observed over the years is that a lot of organizations are really, really fast to put in super restrictive policies. But when things go the opposite direction and it's looking to give the users more freedom, those types of policies tend to take a lot longer to put into place. You typically have to convince a lot more people, and there's more hoops to jump through. But remember, if the goal is to discourage the use of shadow IT and to improve user satisfaction, then look for ways to make it easier to adopt those procedures that will allow users to change the way that they work or what they work from or how they work, so that the users' lives will ultimately be improved through greater flexibility. Another best practice is that Zero Trust is becoming an absolute must. It's something that most organizations are probably already working on and have been for a while. But there isn't one single tool or technique or procedure that you can use to create Zero Trust. Zero Trust has to come from a variety of different sources. But if you haven't really started on Zero Trust yet, then one of the best places that you should begin is by looking at conditional access policies. Conditional access policies are found in Azure AD, but you do need an Azure AD Premium subscription in order to be able to use them. And I don't want to go too deeply into a discussion of conditional access policies because it's a little beyond the scope of this presentation. But the basic idea is that in the past, access to resources was always based on user accounts and group memberships. A user logs on, they're authenticated, they try to access a resource, and the operating system says, okay, does this group that this user belongs to have access? Yes, okay, then we'll let the user access those resources. Well, conditional access policies allow you greater control with that process. So rather than just looking at group memberships, you can look at a number of different things. And in some cases, you can even look at behavior patterns. So maybe it's one thing if a user accesses the same application at 9 o'clock on Monday morning that they always access. Maybe it's a different situation where if the user attempts to access that same application at 3 o'clock in the morning from a rogue nation on the other side of the world, when they were just in the office a few hours ago. That's the sort of access that you would want to block. Well, those are the types of situations that conditional access can help you with. Think of conditional access as a series of if-then statements that look at more than just who's logged in and what groups they belong to. They can look at a number of other conditions. But the other best practice is don't depend solely on conditional access. Remember, Zero Trust is made up of a number of different procedures and products and everything kind of coming together to form a Zero Trust architecture. So never underestimate the importance of defense in depth. So let's talk for a second about compliance. 2020, when the pandemic first set in, was so disruptive that a lot of organizations just kind of looked the other way with regard to compliance. You know, all of a sudden everybody was working from home because they were forced to, and oh, hey, we've never had to deal with this sort of thing before. So there were some things we're just going to have to let slide. That was kind of the mindset for a lot of organizations at the time. Maybe not every organization, but those organizations were definitely out there. So the problem is that now the situation has become so normalized that compliance is back in effect, and organizations need to take a look at what they're doing that might violate their compliance initiatives. This is a really big deal for organizations that are in regulated industries. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that compliance audits often take a look at how well an organization is adhering to the policies that it has put into place within its compliance documentation. So if you've got a situation that doesn't really mesh well with what you've documented your procedures to be, the solution may be to update your documentation rather than try to shoehorn the procedures to fit what was already documented. But again, your options are going to vary widely depending on what compliance mandates you're subject to. Another important consideration is data backups. Let me grab a sip of water really quickly. So data backups. It's important to make sure that all of your organization's data is being backed up, obviously. But one of the problems from users working remotely is that you can never be 100% sure that users are storing data where it should be stored, either in your data center or up in the cloud somewhere, and not on the user's personal device. Unfortunately, that's just one of the realities of remote work. If you're going to let users use personal devices, there's always a chance that users are going to store sensitive data on those devices. So what do you do about it? Well, the most obvious thing is to discourage local device data storage. Explain to the users the importance of keeping personal data separate from corporate data, and explain where that corporate data should be stored so that way you can back it up. But under the assumption that users probably are going to end up storing at least some data, even if it's just temporarily on their personal device, maybe look at adopting enterprise file sync and share software. What the software does, if you're not familiar with it, is anytime the user is connected to the internet, it will copy the contents of certain folders up to a location of your choosing. So that way you've always got a copy of the data, and then once that data is centrally located, it can be backed up in the usual way. Also, it's really important to make sure that safeguards exist so that if a particular device is lost or stolen, then any data that the user has saved on the device can be wiped. So make sure that you have devices password protected and that you've got some kind of remote wipe solution in place. And then the last thing that I want to talk a little bit about, and I realize I'm kind of running low on time here, is work-life balance. Work-life balance is not exactly an IT subject, but it's one of those things that's impacted all of us since 2020. So I think it makes sense to spend a few minutes talking about it here at the end of the presentation. One of the big things that we've all learned is that technology has the potential to either enhance your life or control it. And the perception of technology can change over time. I'll never forget when I was a little kid and the cell phones had just kind of started to become mainstream a little bit. Seeing a TV show, I don't even remember what show it was, but they were showing one person who was doing business on the golf course using his cell phone and couldn't be happier. And then they showed another guy who was letting his phone wreck his life. He was getting phone calls all night long about the stock market in Japan or something like that. And he seemed absolutely miserable because he couldn't get a good night's sleep because his phone was constantly ringing. So they were trying to show the good and the bad. But while both of those perceptions can be true, perceptions of technology can change over time. I'll never forget quite a few years ago when devices like the one that you see on the screen had first started to become mainstream. I actually had this very device, and I was on vacation down in Key West, I think it was. Anyway, an editor called me and said, "Hey, I'm sorry to disturb you on vacation. I've got this project. I really need you to just take a look at what I've posted, make sure it's right, and then you can get back to your vacation." So because I had a device like this, I was actually able to open Microsoft Word, open the document, read it on the spot, and then email them back, and I was done in 10 minutes. And I was thinking, wow, this has got to be the greatest thing ever. So perceptions change, though, because at the time I'm thinking that's the greatest thing ever. Over time, though, we've become almost slaves to these devices. And so technology has kind of ruined our work-life balance. So it's important to regain a hold on that. So 2020 set a lot of unrealistic expectations, both for IT pros and for end users. For IT pros, 2020 set a lot of unrealistic expectations because we were all working insane hours trying to get remote work to actually function the way that it was supposed to. It's one thing to work an insane number of hours during a crisis. It's another thing to be expected to work those insane hours indefinitely with no end in sight. So it's really important to try to reclaim some of that work-life balance. From an end-user perspective, there were similar problems because a lot of users were pressured into becoming workaholics. The mindset became, hey, you're at home, you're locked down, you're not going anywhere, you might as well be working. Oh, and make sure you're accessible 24/7. So that's why work-life balance has become such a problem. So what can you do about it? Well, unfortunately, there's not necessarily an easy solution to the problem, but there are things that you can do to help. Microsoft 365, for example, has an activity tracking feature that can help you to determine whether or not you have a healthy work-life balance. It takes a look at the types of work that you're doing and what hours of the day or night you're doing it in, and just whether or not you have enough personal time. And if you are getting those types of metrics, then that data can sometimes be useful for setting boundaries and reclaiming your personal life. Maybe you can show that data to your boss and say, hey, look, I'm working 20 hours a day here. What can we do about this? And I've provided a few links on the slide to some content that I've written on similar topics. So I want to wrap things up by talking about the top 5 tips that I've learned about work from home. As I mentioned, I've worked from home for 22 years now, so I kind of feel like I've got a handle on the thing. One of the big lessons that I learned right off the bat was to set expectations. In other words, if somebody wouldn't come to your job site when you're working in a corporate office and bother you there, they shouldn't bother you when you're working in your home office either. Also, maintain dedicated office space. Obviously, that's not practical for everybody because we all have different size homes and different needs. But if at all possible, try to set up a dedicated office space because that makes it a lot easier to walk away from your job at the end of the day and leave it behind so that you're not just constantly working. Another thing is that comfort matters a lot. If you're going to be spending a lot of time in your home office, look for things that you can do to make it more comfortable and more attuned to your own style and your own needs and wants. And then the second to the last one on the list is make sure that you get out once in a while. When I first started working from home, I realized that I was spending an insane amount of hours at home and that I was becoming a bit of a hermit. So I actually started making a conscious effort to get out at least once per day, just so that I could make sure that I wasn't just confining myself to my home and never leaving. And that actually did wonders for me. And then the last thing on the list, it's kind of obvious, but don't forget about me time. Make sure you're not spending all of your time working and do some things that you enjoy once in a while. So with that said, I know I've covered a tremendous amount of information in a short amount of time. Hopefully a lot of that made sense, and I think we've got some questions and answers to get to.
We definitely do. Thanks so much, Brian, for that presentation. Let's just jump right into the questions. Here's a good one. You mentioned conditional access policies. Is that something that is built into Windows?
No, it's not built into Windows. It's built into Azure Active Directory. But you will need an Azure Active Directory Premium subscription to be able to use that. I believe it's Premium P1.
Okay. This question comes from David. How can you draw the line between being the employee's personal IT provider versus support for business function?
Yeah, that goes back to those support policies that I was talking about earlier. That's a tough one that anybody who's ever worked help desk has had to deal with. We all know how it is to have somebody call the help desk and, oh, by the way, while you're at it, I'm having a problem with my system at home. My kid did such and such. And there's never an easy answer to that one other than just to be assertive, maybe a little bit more assertive than you would like to be, and set boundaries. Otherwise, you're going to be enslaved to people's home systems forever. One thing that I've sometimes used as an excuse is that once you touch somebody's system and do anything at all to it, most people are going to assume any future problems that they have are related to what it was that you did, even if it actually has no connection. So, play the responsibility card. Tell them that you don't want to be responsible for things that may happen in the future.
Okay, Lily wants to know, what's the name of that Office 365 activity tracking tool called that you talked about earlier?
Microsoft has changed the name of that tool several times. I believe the current name of it is Microsoft Viva.
Okay. This is more of a general question for you. Do you consider work from home and hybrid work to be a major disruptor, or is it really just an extension of trends from a few years before the pandemic?
I think that the case could be made for either, but I tend to lean toward thinking that it really is a disruptor because before the pandemic, remote work was becoming more common, but we've never ever seen this situation before where all of a sudden, almost overnight, everybody was working remotely. So I would absolutely call that a disruptor.
Okay. You touched a little bit on the work-life balance at the end. In the grand scheme of things, how important would you consider work-life balance to be, especially for us all working from home these days?
I would consider it to be absolutely essential because if you don't have some sort of work-life balance, then the boundaries between work life and home life will be forever blurred, and you'll feel like you're constantly chained to your work. You know, as somebody who has worked from home for over 2 decades, it's something I've absolutely dealt with. You know, I've even gone through times in my life where I felt like, you know, if I was out away running some errands, like, oh, I should really be checking emails right now, and I would catch myself constantly thinking about work. So you've got to find a way to separate the two.
Well, great. It looks like that's the end of our questions. Thank you again, Brian. Everyone, please stay tuned. We're going to take a short break and be back at the top of the hour for our third session, Hottest Third-Party Products and the giveaway of our Apple AirPods Max headphones, which you must be present to win. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to our third session. Becky, please take it away.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate you being here. I'm so happy to have you join us back for our third and final session of the summit, How to Third-Party Products. Some quick notes before we start. Again, we thank you for attending. Please be sure to stick around to the end, not only because you need to be online in order to win the Apple AirPods Max headphones. You don't have to do anything. You just have to be online. We do a random drawing of everyone who's online. But also at the very end, we do a survey. And what we do is in that survey is we're going to ask you exactly what you think of this. You're going to tell us what you like, what you don't. And that really helps us. You know, the editors work really hard at planning these and making these happen for you guys. They're for you. They're for the community. So we really, really want your feedback because that helps us make future events. And then speaking of future events and speaking of the community, we really want to thank our sponsors, Martello, Splashtop, Okta, RingCentral, and Smarsh. The thing about we cannot do these events without our sponsors. They underwrite this content. They are the reason they allow us to bring you these for free. So please, please, please show your thanks to these sponsors. We have resources in that console. Please download those. Please go to the sites, you know, get those demos, get those free trials, follow them on Twitter, do everything you can to show them that we appreciate them supporting the community, and want them to, you know, continue to be involved because we really, really do appreciate that. So thank you again, Martello, Splashtop, Okta, RingCentral, and Smarsh. Thanks to you. And with that, we'll go ahead and we'll get started with our third session. And I'm thrilled to announce our first speaker is Rob Doucette. He's the Vice President of Product Marketing at Martello. Rob, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session, Recommendations for Managing the Return to the Office. I'll be the sole speaker today. My name is Rob Doucette. I'm the VP of Product Management at Martello Technologies. So today we're going to go over hybrid work preparedness and what organizations should be thinking about to be prepared now. We'll outline what are some of the real-world challenges that IT faces as users return to the office. And then we're going to go over some specific recommendations on how to best manage that return. So first, when we look at the hybrid workplace environment, we really see this beginning with a bit of a paradox where employees want the flexibility of remote, flexible work, but they also want that inspiration, that creativity that comes when they're in person. And so as organizations try to manage the experience for these hybrid work environments, it's important that all the tools are supporting that, such that you're not creating an environment where the in-person attendees maybe have a better experience than the remote attendees, which is going to create an unproductive environment for those meetings. So we want to make sure that those tools really create an immersive experience, whether you're in person in a meeting or happen to be the only person who's dialing in remotely. So certainly Microsoft Teams is critical in today's environment, and the performance that it comes with is equally important. It's seen massive growth over the last couple of years. Last reported, Microsoft revealed 270 million monthly active users of Teams, and it continues to grow. And we know that for Teams to perform well in an organization, there are some minimum requirements that organizations should be aware of. In particular, as users return to office, many of those offices were originally designed with voice in mind and not necessarily video. Over the last year or two, most of us have become more accustomed and using video as our primary tool for communication. And that comes with different bandwidth requirements and different things to think about in terms of being able to deliver that quality of service. And we know it's important because if it's not performing well, there is a productivity hit that can come with that. If we look at the employee experience, if you're having a bad experience, you may not necessarily create a ticket with IT. You may try and fix that problem yourself. You may lean on peers. And ultimately, you're sapping some productivity out of your day and potentially others. And then when we look at IT's impact, they need a way to respond to these tickets if someone's calling or complaining. How do I find out what's going on with a particular user? What information do I have at my fingertips? And what tools can I take advantage of to actually give me the visibility I need to understand where those problems are? So let's jump into the first recommendation. And that's really about establishing a performance baseline in those offices. So, if we try and do this after users have returned to the office, it becomes quite challenging because we already have traffic and data flowing through that office. But if we're able to get a baseline in before the bulk of your users return, we can assess the impact to that office as users return, especially those that are active Teams users. We want to make sure that we're proactive as much as we can here, again, getting ahead of this before your users are back in the office. Once everyone's back in the office, it's really hard to pinpoint where that problem might come from. And ultimately, we want to make sure that the office networks are right-sized because, again, as I mentioned, a lot of this right-sizing happened around voice and not video. And all this is critical to make sure that, as users return to the office and embrace this hybrid workplace environment, we want to minimize the disruptions, not just to the employee, but also to the IT departments. And so now I'm just jumping into the demo here to take a look at what this can look like. And we're taking a look at what we call our robots. And this is our synthetic transaction technology. And these are proactively testing all the aspects of Microsoft 365, including Teams, and taking a user-centric approach. We're not just pinging endpoints here, but rather looking at all the actions that users might take with respect to Teams and OneDrive and SharePoint and Exchange and so on, and measuring the performance of those actions over time so that we can see how things are performing from a trend analysis perspective. So here I've got a robot deployed in the office. You can see at the very top here, I've got a historical view of my mean opinion score for my Teams calls. So this gives me a view of, as users return to the office, what's the impact of this mean opinion score over time? Mine looks pretty flat here over the last week or so. If we scroll down, we can see the various actions that these robots are taking. This is the Teams-specific dashboard that I'm looking at. So we see authentication time, connection time, the amount of time it takes to post messages to channels, all the different types of things that users might be doing to assess what does the office environment look like in terms of its ability to support users today, and how does that get affected as users return to the office. And again, Teams is typically the leading edge in these conversations because the real-time communication is the most sensitive to disruptions in the office network. But we can get this same view across the entire stack, whether it's Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, et cetera. Now let's take a look at the second recommendation, and that's really around establishing clear visibility of the user experience. We know there's a lot of factors in between the user and where Microsoft hosts and delivers the service that can affect the experience of a Teams user. Right from the laptop, what applications are running on that laptop or desktop that might be competing for resources, the local network you're connected to, whether it's wired or wireless. Are there other people on that local network competing for the bandwidth that you might have access to? Is your traffic going through a VPN or a cloud proxy? How is your ISP performing? And then last but not least, how is the Microsoft side of the equation performing in terms of authentication, routing, your front door discovery, all the types of things that need to work in tandem for a user to have a good experience with Teams. So how are we going to get this visibility? So let's take a look at what this looks like in Vantage DX. I'm in our diagnostics capability here, and I have some probes deployed in various users' laptops as well as some office environments. And with respect to Teams, I do see I have some problems happening within my Singapore office. So I'm going to drill into this test result here. And what this is going to load up is what the network path looks like between Singapore and the Microsoft Teams servers and data center. And so here I see a hop-by-hop analysis of the path my network traffic has been taking. I'm going to group this by who owns the chunk of the network to make it a little bit easier to understand. And here now it becomes immediately obvious that I am getting some problems in terms of my Singapore users and their access to Teams. And I can see that it's an ISP that's actually causing the problem here, my Bell backbone. And if I look at the details of the path here, I can see where jitter is being introduced along that path. And so I see a little bit of jitter in the local network, but nothing to be too concerned about. But across the ISP, I'm seeing quite a bit of jitter that can be affecting the experience of my users in Singapore. And again, this is intended to provide some visibility to that gap I mentioned. There's lots of stuff in between the user and the Microsoft data center. And now I immediately can rule out that it's not a Microsoft problem. It's not a problem with my local Singapore network, but I need to take a look at what bandwidth and what quality of service is being delivered from my ISP. All right, now let's look at the third and last recommendation that we're going to look at, and that's really about having a process for troubleshooting user issues. We know that when a user calls IT, IT doesn't always necessarily have all the information about that user at their fingertips, but we should try to understand, what can we do to make sure that IT can respond accurately and quickly to provide that user with some information that they can take action on immediately instead of waiting for some follow-up. We know that it's difficult to go back in time and try to understand what was happening at that time, but there are some things that we can look at to make sure that users are clear, what can they do when they call IT, and IT has a process for responding to those issues instead of piecemealing together a bunch of third-party tools or native commands to try and piece that information together. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So here's an example of a dashboard that we have available with Martello Vantage DX that summarizes the experience for my users based on their call quality experience and the types of issues that they're running into. So through this dashboard, by default, it's showing me all the users in my environment, and I see where activity is happening, the types of problems that are happening. But more specifically, I want to be able to respond when a user calls me. And here I have a drop-down. I have all the details of all the users in my environment. So if a particular person is calling me, I can find them in the list here, select their name here. Let's just pick one here. And now the dashboard is going to change in context to show me all the information we know about this particular user. We can see that we're having a pretty high percentage of poor calls for this user. I can see the types of calls that are happening, whether they're PSTN-based call or VoIP calls, the devices that are in play here that they're using to have those calls. That's a scenario we hear a lot, that the user's complaining about poor Teams calls, not recognizing that it might actually just be one particular device that they're using or one network that they're on that's causing the bulk of their problems. We can see where these calls are happening for this user, their top issues, the source of their problems. So here we see quite a bit of round-trip time problems. We've got some Wi-Fi strength problems. So we already have a more informed response to provide back to the user to help guide them with their decisions. The classic example might be if they are having the bulk of their calls on a wireless network, are they too far away from their access point, which we can see from signal strength, low signal strength in these dashboards. So that summarizes the 3 recommendations that I wanted to walk you through today. We have a lot of different use cases that we can walk through. These are just 3 very specific ones that we hear about quite a bit. But if you'd like to see more in terms of what Martello and Vantage DX can do for your organization, help you pinpoint, identify where the problems are in your environment, give you the tools you need and the insights of the data so that you can understand how to fix them, and then use the robot technology that I showed at the beginning of the demonstration in terms of taking a proactive approach and making sure that the next set of problems are caught by software and not your user, such that IT can respond and fix those problems before any users notice. So we'd love if you would take a time to visit our website, book a demo, and we can show you what Martello Vantage DX can do for you. Thanks, everyone.
Great presentation there from Rob. Rob could not be with us today for the live Q&A, but go ahead and get your questions in to the console, and we will get your questions over to Rob. By the way, we do have plenty of speakers here live to answer your questions. So as you're watching presentations, put your questions into that Q&A box, and we'll make sure that as soon as the presentation is over, we'll get them over to the speakers. So next up, I'm absolutely thrilled to have with us our next speaker for the session. It's Natasha Waldekar, Chief Director of the Product Marketing at Splashtop. Natasha, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Natasha Wadalkar. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for Splashtop. In this session today, we'll talk about how Splashtop Remote Access and Remote Support can help your organization leverage the top industry trends, as well as implement a secure and productive remote workforce. We'll take a quick look at the major remote work trends that continue to impact organizations in 2022. We'll go over how Splashtop can help your organization stay ahead of these trends. We'll take a look at the platform and its capabilities in a demo before opening it up for Q&A. All right, let's jump into it. I'd like to call 3 main trends to your attention that have accelerated during the pandemic. First and foremost, of course, is security. The pandemic has given cybersecurity a whole new level of importance, with employees working remotely and using their own devices to do so. Most companies weren't prepared to handle this from a security standpoint and were exposed to ransomware and other cybersecurity attacks. Hence, you see this 151% increase in ransomware attacks in the first half of last year. Compliance with data privacy regulations like GDPR, CCPA, and others also require a different security stance for a remote workforce. We hear from our customers and partners every day how security is at the top of everyone's mind and is a primary focus for all businesses in 2022. The second trend I'd like to highlight is that of hybrid work. We all know that it's here to stay beyond the pandemic. In fact, 75% of current remote workers want to continue to have that flexibility. And IT teams need a solution that will cater to both in-person and remote work and support the increased demands that come with it. There's been an explosion in the number and the kind of devices that are now used in the workplace as well. In fact, according to Gartner, through 2024, remote workers will use at least 4 different device types for remote working. That's a lot many devices to support, and many security loopholes if not managed properly. The third trend is that of tool consolidation. When we all got that shutdown notice, many companies purchased several tools to keep their businesses running remotely. We didn't have the time to think and weigh out all our options. But now we do, and we have a clearer picture of what's needed. So rather than have siloed remote work tools, according to the statistics, 65% companies are actively consolidating them for easy management and scalability. So these are the top trends that you can stay ahead of with Splashtop. Splashtop offers secure remote access for individuals, organizations, educational and government institutions. Business users can remotely access work computers from any device, and IT can also remotely support managed and personal devices from anywhere. I'd like to highlight some benefits of using Splashtop to implement your remote workforce. You get high-performance remote sessions with up to 60 frames per second, low latency, reliable connections, and a robust set of features that improve business users as well as IT's productivity. You get solutions that employ the highest standards of security and compliance measures in the industry. We understand security is a continuous process, and it's always our priority. Over 30 million users in 85% of Fortune 500 companies, large banks, law enforcement, and government agencies trust Splashtop solutions. Along with the enterprise-grade security, Splashtop provides consumer-grade usability and simplicity. You get a user-friendly, all-in-one interface to access and support multiple operating systems, device types, physical as well as virtual environments. And last but not the least, Splashtop offers best-in-class customer support whenever and wherever you need it. Just to highlight this further, I'd like to share a customer story from Warner Brothers New Zealand, who had a large focus on user experience and security. Their video editors use Splashtop to access their workstations remotely, and their IT also uses Splashtop to provide remote support. And these are the quotes from their IT manager. Now let's take a look at the platform itself. I'm going to demonstrate Splashtop Enterprise in just a bit here, which is our remote, all-in-one remote access and remote support solution. And I'm going to show it to you from the perspective of an IT professional. All right, so this is your Splashtop console. Once you get your Splashtop account, you can go to my.splashtop.com to access this console. Let's first take a look at you as an IT professional, how you would enable your business users to remotely access their work computers. So there are 3 easy steps to that. Step 1 is to install a streamer or the Splashtop agent on the computers that need to be remotely accessed. To do that, first go to Management and Deployment. And you can either select the default deployment package, or if you have specific criteria, just go and create your deployment package and select the necessary settings. Once you've done that, just save it. I'm going to go ahead and select the default package. So when you click on deploy, you get two options. You can use a shareable link and send it to your business users to download and run the installer. Or you can download the installer and send the 12-digit code to the users. You could even use it with a third-party tool like an RMM or group policy to mass deploy to all the computers at once. Once this is done and the installer or the streamer is on the endpoints that need to be remotely accessed, they will show up under computers here. Now, step 2 is to invite the business users to join Splashtop and give them access permissions to be able to remote into their workstations. So to do that, I first go to Users and invite all the users to use Splashtop. So I can enter multiple emails here. I can select a role, whether they're admin or member. And I can also group them at this point. Once this invite is sent out, I can go ahead and give them access permissions. So let's say this is a user that I want to give permission to. I go here, and I can give this person access to all computers, only computers in a specific group, or specific computers as well. I go ahead and save the settings. And that's it from your end. So step 3 is for the business user to go ahead and download the Splashtop business app on whichever devices he or she would like to remote in from. And that's it. And then they'd be able to see the computers that they have access to from the business app. You can also integrate Splashtop with your single sign-on provider, so users can log in with their SSO credentials. You also have access to additional settings where you can give the users granular permissions rather than give everybody access to everything. All right, now let's see what a remote session looks like. I'm going to remote into a computer I have installed the streamer on. I go ahead and click Connect. This computer is in my office, and I'm remoting in from home. And that's it. I have chosen the option to remember my password, and I'm remoted in. So I can basically control this computer just as I would in person, and I can open the apps, edit files, and so on. I also have access to these in-session features here, so I can view multiple monitors. I have access to view options. I can maximize my screen. I can do Control-Alt-Delete. I can record the session. I can transfer files between the two computers, simply drag and drop. And I also have access to additional features, like I'd like to highlight a couple here. USB device redirection basically allows me to use any USB device just as if it were connected to the remote computer. So I can use a Wacom tablet or any HID device as if I were sitting at the remote workstation. I can also redirect a mic input. I can also share my desktop with another user, and so on. And as a technician, I can also chat with the end user through the chat feature during a support session. All right, that's it. And then once I'm done using the computer, I simply disconnect the session. Splashtop also keeps detailed logs of the remote sessions, the files that have been transferred, chat transcripts, and so on. And you can access them here under logs. All right, now let's take a look at how you can provide effective IT support to your business users, no matter where they are or what device they're using. Let's go to the Service Desk console. So here on the left, you see channels, which is how you can group technicians within your team. You can either create groups by customer, by business unit, by expertise, skill level, and so on. And here on the right, you see the support sessions within that channel. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new channel. Let's say I want to create one for Mac experts. At this point, I can also customize the app using the organization's logo, colors, and so on. And once that's done, I click Next. At this point, I can assign technicians and technician groups to this channel. So I'm going to go ahead. I have a group of users called Mac experts. I'm going to assign them to this channel. I can also assign an individual technician to this channel. I'm going to assign myself and click Next. So at this point, I can assign granular permissions to the group or the individual technician. I can make somebody the channel manager that gives me permission to do all these actions, or I can be granular and give certain technicians to only create a support session or take a support session that's assigned to the entire channel, and so on. So I click Save and Proceed, and that's my channel. Now I can go back to the Service Desk console, and I see the channel here. So let's go ahead and create a support session within this channel. Let's say a user, John, has reached out for help. I go ahead and create a support session for John. That gives me a Service Desk link. So I'm going to copy that and send it to John to download and run the app. Okay, so I'm going to log into a remote computer and pretend to be John here. I'm going to go to that link and download the support app. All right, I open it. At this point, on the technician side, the status, as you noticed here, was waiting when I created the support session. And then as the user downloads and runs the app, it changes to active. So at this point, now I can proceed to start the remote session. And I can request permission from John to control his computer. So I'm going to click Request and then take you to the user screen where it should pop up for to grant or reject request. So I'm going to go ahead and grant the technician permission to access my computer. Going back to the technician console, I hope this is not too confusing. This icon here changed saying that I have now permission to remote in, and I just click and start the remote session just as we saw earlier. And that's it. So as you can see from the end user's point of view, it was just a one-click download of an app to enable the technician to remotely access their computer. And from a technician's point of view now, I have a support queue that I can view and monitor all my support requests. I can also, let's say I am not able to resolve the issue in the session, I can simply transfer the session to another channel or another technician to take the matter forward. And I'm going to transfer. So it goes out of this queue and goes into the other channel queue. Another option is to invite technicians into the support call itself for faster resolution. And as you can imagine, these capabilities enable faster resolution of support requests and help improve metrics like mean time to resolution, first call resolution, and so on. You also have access to endpoint management features, so you can set up alert profiles to monitor CPU utilization, memory usage, disk space, and so on. You can also do one-to-many actions, so simultaneously execute tasks like system reboot, perform Windows updates across multiple computers simultaneously. You can also schedule this to run at a later time. We also have endpoint security. So you have a dashboard that gives you the last scan time, the threats and vulnerabilities on your computers. You have the option to purchase Bitdefender and also install that on your endpoints and manage that through the Splashtop console. I'd also like to highlight Splashtop connector here. It's a way you can access endpoints through RDP without using a VPN. So let's say you have computers that you cannot install a third-party app on, or that don't have access to the internet. Or let's say you want to support multiple concurrent sessions using terminal services, or you want to access a specific application instead of providing access to the entire desktop. You can do all of that using the Splashtop connector. To demonstrate this, I have installed the Splashtop connector on this loaner machine, which is typically the machine that has access to all the computers that you would like to remote in via RDP. So I'm going to show you the connector on this computer. This is a Splashtop connector, and you add profiles for all the computers that you want to remote in through RDP. Here I have created this profile already to access this particular computer through RDP. So what that allows me to do now is access that computer from any other computer without having any agent installed on it. Let's say now I'm on a device from home, and I can see that I can now connect to this computer here, for which I created a profile through the Splashtop connector. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to it. And there you see, I'm remoted in without having to install anything on this computer. And that's it. All right, so that was the demo that I wanted to share with you all. Hope you all enjoyed it. That's our contact information there if you would like to learn more about anything. With that, we will open it up for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Great presentation. It's so good to get in there and really see what the product can do. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. We do have a number of questions. Guys, if we get any other questions you have in now, if we don't have time for them, we'll get them over to Natasha and she can answer them later on. So your questions will get answered. But let's start with this one. Which SSO providers do you work with? Does it work with Active Directory?
Hi, so this is Megan. I'll be answering on behalf of Splashtop for this one. So for SSO providers, oh yeah, of course, thanks. so we support any IDP that uses SAML 2. So that includes Okta, Azure AD, ADFS, a lot of those popular ones. And again, anything with SAML 2. So generally we have guides that will help you walk you through setting that up for the more popular ones, such as Azure and Okta. But if you use any others that still use SAML 2, maybe like G Suite, like Google, those can still work. You just might have to do some additional custom work or custom configurations in your app.
Okay, awesome. Another question that came in, and it was obviously you guys were talking about the connector. Does the connector support other protocols?
So the connector only supports RDP at the moment, but we do have a plan in the future to support other third-party protocols. And our vision for this is really the reason why we called it Splashtop connector and not, RDP connector is for this reason. We want it to be a bridge for other protocols. So in the future, we might be supporting like Telnet, SSH. I think we also have plans for VNC as well, so that you can access, network devices. So that is on the roadmap for that.
Awesome. Okay, here's a question. I saw that you have remote camera sharing. How do we access that?
Okay, so this remote camera sharing, it's probably referring to our SOS AR, so augmented reality. So it is currently in beta. So to find it, you can probably just Google search Splashtop SOS AR. It's going to be like the first result that comes up. But alternatively, you could sign up. Let me get the link right here. I believe it's splashtop.com/SOS-AR-beta/program. I'll paste that in the chat somewhere. But yeah, it is currently in beta. Basically, along with just remote camera sharing, so technicians viewing the remote camera of the end user that they're helping out, it includes augmented reality features like being able to draw and annotate on the screen and having those drawings and instructions move with the camera as it, navigates the live space.
Okay, great. And I know, again, this was at the very end of the presentation, but can you repeat again, what do people need to do if they want to get their hands on the product, try a free trial? What's the best way to go about that?
So the best way, and Nitiasha, you can chime in if I miss anything here, but it's probably just to contact our team. So sales@splashtop.com is our sales team email if you're interested in an interaction. Otherwise, if we have any form of noting contact after this webinar, we can reach out through that list as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much for that presentation.
All right, thank you.
If I could just chime in there, I see another question. David asked, are you showing what is called Business Access Pro? So I just want to say there, what we showed here was Splashtop Enterprise, which includes the features of Business Access Pro and some advanced features. Plus, you have the option of also adding on remote support licenses. So it's an all-in-one access and support product. And just to add to what Megan said earlier, you can go to our website, splashtop.com, and start a free trial right away, or you could send us an email there, and we can help you set it up.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for being with us today. We really do appreciate it. And again, guys, any other questions you have, get them in, and we'll get them over to the team, and we'll get them answered for you. So thanks again. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to our next presenter. We have with us Ryan Terry, Senior Solutions Product Marketing Manager at Okta. Ryan, please take it away.
Hello, my name is Ryan Terry. I'm a Senior Solutions Product Marketing Manager here at Okta, specifically covering our security solutions. And I'll be discussing today's distributed workforce landscape, including fully remote employees and hybrid working models, and how a zero trust security strategy is essential in supporting today's modern working environment. I'm going to cover why you should consider an identity-first approach to your zero trust security strategy, and what steps you can take immediately to help your organization advance towards that zero trust model and secure against the identity-driven threats that are so prevalent today. But before I get started, I want to kick things off with a little buzzword bingo. In today's landscape, technology and security teams are facing threats like phishing, ransomware, malware, DDoS, zero-day, and DNS attacks. To address these, we are seeing innovations that promise scalable, orchestrated, automated, next-gen technology that provides visibility and leverages machine learning, AI, and comprehensive behavioral context-aware monitoring. And on top of these threats, there are frameworks, regulation, and compliance requirements to adhere to. So what's left? Various strategies that all focus on evolving the way we think about securing our environments. But where should you start? You should start where it makes sense for your business, but we are engaged in a never-ending challenge to enable employees, business partners, and supply chain to access the resources they need to do their jobs effectively from anywhere they choose, home, at our physical company buildings, in airports and coffee shops, and so many more places, all while ensuring we are protecting those people and the resources they're accessing at all times. It's no longer news that companies need to support an increasingly distributed workforce. This really was the case already before the global pandemic, but now 82% of company leaders plan to allow employees to work remotely at least part of the time after the pandemic, and 47% plan to allow them to permanently work from home going forward. The game has changed, yet we still rely on the same approaches to protect ourselves. It's no wonder that cyber attacks appear to be 3 moves ahead. The surface that needs to be protected keeps shifting. The perimeter has changed. Even with everything we know, identity-based attacks are still the leading cause of compromise. More than 60% of all breaches involve stolen credentials. Phishing is increasingly present in the number of breaches tracked, and recent ransomware attacks have shut down schools and hospitals and affected the availability of fuel and food in the United States. While these buzzwords may foster a culture of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, we can't ignore that these are real problems that simply aren't going away. We have inadvertently left the back door open by not putting adequate protections in place for what is being thought of as the new perimeter. So we know organizations with gaps in their identity security stacks are significantly more at risk. In light of the current threat landscape, organizations around the world have moved past traditional security approaches and are widely adopting zero trust security strategies that are strongly recommended by industry analysts and in some cases even mandated by the federal government. It's safe to say that zero trust security has moved beyond buzzword status and is here to stay for the long term. Okta recently surveyed more than 600 security decision makers at companies around the world, and we've just released these findings in our 2021 State of Zero Trust Security report. 90% of respondents stated they either have a zero trust initiative in place or will have one in the next 12 to 18 months. That's up from 41% in the 2020 report. When asked whether the pandemic or today's working environment has changed the prioritization of zero trust for their organizations, more than 3/4 or 78% of companies globally say that zero trust has increased in priority and in some cases has become the organization's top priority, as is the case with 36% of the Forbes Global 2000 companies and 30% of healthcare companies that were surveyed as part of this report. If we believe that identity is effectively the new perimeter for organizations today, then this is the logical place to start, no matter what overall security strategy you have prioritized. Identity ensures the right person has the right access in the right context, regardless of their location, device, or network. To that end, it's likely no surprise that organizations ranked people and devices as the top core security requirements within a zero trust security strategy in terms of priority. And this is part of that same zero trust report that Okta produced this year. Gartner has also listed identity first security on their top 10 security and risk management trends in 2021. Again, this really isn't any news. The control plane, the thing that connects all of our systems and processes, has always been identity. What has changed is how our architectures have evolved and become more complex. As more organizations move to modernize and go through a digital transformation, another buzzword, identity is becoming even more critical, which is why this is the logical starting point when you are considering how to evolve your approach to securing your environments. The real question is, are you prioritizing identity? And if you are, is your program robust and sufficient enough to shift towards a proactive protection layer? We're finding our customers are thinking about their identity and access management maturity in this way. And this is a model they're using to start their zero trust security initiatives. So starting from left to right with fragmented identity, where there's very little integration, a heavy reliance on passwords, and where a lot of the access decisions they're making are based on static policies. As programs mature, we start to unify identity and access management and set the groundwork for doing contextual access in a zero trust way. This means deploying single sign-on across employees, partners, and the supply chain, using modern multi-factor authentication, and unifying policies across apps and servers. Then as you continue to move towards the right, you get into the contextual access stage. This is where you're starting to use context-based access policies, like understanding whether a device is trusted or not. You're using multiple factors across user groups, like hard tokens or push verification, or even biometrics. And you're doing automated deprovisioning for people leaving your organization, or contractors as they no longer work with your organization, because you don't want them to have access to those resources once they're no longer working with you. And you're also providing secure access to APIs. And then in stage 3, this is the adaptive workforce stage. You're no longer relying on context-based policies, but really risk-based access policies to increase your security. Doing continuous and adaptive authentication and authorization and frictionless access, often in the form of passwordless authentication, which we're seeing many organizations start to think about over the coming 12 to 18 months. Our research found organizations around the world plan to make significant strides towards maturing on this identity and access management maturity curve in the coming 12 to 18 months. And I'm specifically going to cover where companies are at now and where they're focusing in the coming months from stages 1 through 3. So you can see here the majority of organizations have indicated that they've already implemented both single sign-on, SSO, and multi-factor authentication, MFA, for employees across resources within their organizations. The top priorities for organizations globally over the next 12 to 18 months are implementing SSO and MFA for external users like contractors, suppliers, and business partners, and also setting context-based access policies. This is likely due to the fact most organizations are working with so many folks outside their own organization, but still need access to resources and data to get their jobs done, all while supply chain attacks are consistently on the rise. So this is where you can take immediate action to mature within stage 1 of the maturity curve and begin to move towards stage 2. A quick example of a case study that aligns to stage 1 is the French Red Cross. The French Red Cross wanted a way to centralize the management of employee and volunteer accounts within a single system. With all accounts now integrated and managed within the Okta Identity Cloud, the team has greater visibility over all of their accounts. Okta Workflows also improves a number of processes. For example, the team needed a way of rapidly creating temporary accounts. The team developed a solution in 2 weeks where an internal user can create a new temporary account, which will automatically expire within 48 hours without any support from the IT team. Again, stage 2 is the contextual access stage. You can see here that organizations are primarily focusing on securing access to APIs, deploying multiple factors across user groups, and automating the provisioning and deprovisioning of employees now and in the coming months. These are some areas of focus for you to consider whether they make sense for your specific organization to remove risk and add stronger authentication across your resources. But these projects are on the tops of the minds of your peers and companies of all sizes in all industries and locations around the world. These projects will help you move from stage 2 to stage 3 and continue to advance your zero trust strategies. To include an example here, we've got a quick case study with T-Mobile. While I could spend a lot of time sharing Zero Trust journey of T-Mobile, let me pick one example of how they leveraged Okta and our identity platform. They utilized our attribute-based access control, which employs user attributes such as position, department, and business roles to assign users access. Access evaluation results could be allowing access to resources, denying access, or challenging for MFA with higher assurance. Context could also vary with the type of application. For example, a mobile app may require implementing a mobile device management or MDM profile to ensure security level required for a client integrity and source of origination. This is really just one example. T-Mobile has achieved incredible results during this journey. Okta's solution also helped them save 15% in operational costs, which at the scale of T-Mobile is a significant dollar number. Finally, in stage 3, adaptive workforce, we asked respondents whether they plan to adopt passwordless authentication. One way organizations can increase flexibility is by embracing passwordless access while using high assurance factors. Given the insecurity of passwords, particularly since 73% of online accounts use duplicated passwords, credential harvesting tends to be one of the most fruitful tactics for today's threat actors. Relying on passwords alone leaves organizations vulnerable to password spray and credential stuffing attacks. Multiple high assurance factors, such as factor sequencing, biometric-based logins through WebAuthn or U2F security keys, can mitigate these risks and provide the flexibility of passwordless authentication. This year, more than a quarter of respondents said they either have or will soon have implemented passwordless access options for their users. For Global 2000 companies, that's even higher, as 50% will have adopted passwordless options in the next 12 to 18 months. FedEx has spent 20 years spinning up IAM point solutions and found it was consistently playing a game of whack-a-mole from a security perspective. Each solution created a bigger attack surface for the company, more friction for its software developers, and multiple logins for employees. In order for FedEx to achieve its zero trust vision, it needed to establish trusted relationships between multiple vendors, including VMware and Workspace ONE. FedEx adopted the Okta solution and provides simple and secure access to SaaS, cloud native, and legacy applications. With the Okta Identity Cloud, FedEx has achieved its zero trust vision, reduced its attack surface, replacing 5 legacy IAM systems with 1, Okta, and enhanced the end user experience by enabling passwordless authentication in certain scenarios. Identity and access management provides you with a single control plane to manage risk-based access for everyone and to all of the things they need access to. Everyone means your employees, business partners, contractors, suppliers, machines, and so on. Everything means all of the apps, servers, APIs, networks that they use and they access, regardless of whether they're cloud or on-prem. And at the heart of this control plane is a risk engine that takes different signals to help determine if access should be granted easily, passwordless, stepped up, i.e. MFA, or even denied altogether. So now we've discussed how others are prioritizing identity, and it's clear why you should start with identity. But let's chat a bit why not everyone is doing this already. There is no question that there is fundamental challenges at the business level around funding and prioritization, at the people level with identity and security teams being disconnected, and at the technical level with the complex mix of legacy and cloud technologies. Identity can be prioritized as a foundational part of your security strategy. A key component of getting started is to ensure you have appropriate sponsorship. This is an initiative that needs to come from the bottom up and the top down. According to the recent study by Logarithm and Ponemon Group, one of the biggest blockers is when the executive level doesn't have a clear understanding of the potential impact of security incidents and feel that IT leaders don't fundamentally understand the business goals. Not only do we need alignment at the business level, but we also need to align core priorities and foster collaboration between security and identity teams. With appropriate funding, prioritization and cooperation between teams adopting the right technology is the last piece of the puzzle. Complex or legacy architectures can be modernized with the adoption of agnostic platforms that bring everything together and create a common identity source that has security controls like authentication and policies. Each access attempt needs to be verified regardless of who or where it's coming from. The real magic of our secure identity platform isn't just all of the risk signals we evaluate within Okta, it's how we share those signals across your security stack of choice. We have over 7,000 pre-built integrations across applications and infrastructure. Many of these integrations allow us to ingest security signals to make context access decisions, such as device compromise signals with CrowdStrike or understanding highly targeted users from Proofpoint. We believe your identity control plane needs to enable flexibility and choice both today and tomorrow. We want to be your strategic business partner for identity, and we're well on our way to achieving our vision of a unified access management, identity governance, and privileged access platform. Our goal is to relieve our customers from the complexity and overhead they experience with traditional solutions, and ultimately help them deliver a secure, scalable, and compliance-based access experience that fully supports their business goals and objectives. So for next steps, I encourage you to check out our 2021 State of Zero Trust Security Report and take our Identity and Zero Trust Assessment. Both can be found on okta.com under Solutions and then specifically under our Zero Trust Solution webpage. Both will help you understand where your peers are at, where your organization is at within the identity and access management maturity model, and what specific next steps you can take to advance towards your zero trust security initiatives. Thank you very much for your time today. If you have any other questions, please go to okta.com and have a great day. Thank you.
Great presentation for Brian there, and Brian can be with us today, but please get your questions, any questions you have for him in the system, or again, go to the site and we'll get them answered for you. And now on behalf with us, it's Ken Zhang. He's the AVP GTM of Marketing at RingCentral. RingCentral always has great stuff going on, so I'm really excited to see what Ken's going to be showing us today. So Ken, please take it away.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks so much. Make sure that you get all of the questions into the chat, and if I can't answer them today on the call, then we'll definitely follow up with you too as well. So you can always connect with me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. And as we're sort of moving along here, it's been obviously a couple of years, obviously with a number of different challenges. And really from the standpoint of today's theme, we absolutely need to start looking at reimagining the hybrid workforce and what that really looks like in your work environments. But overall, above all else, we absolutely want to help organizations simplify their business communications. And so this is no real surprise to everyone. I mean, it's been a long couple of years with regards to all the various different changes that have happened, with regards to the pandemic. In terms of it's absolutely been a whirlwind with regards to adjusting the technology stack to make sure it works for you, to be able to provide that continuity, making all the various different adjustments and so forth. And so, those propose a significant amount of challenges. But however, what we have learned, over the last 2 years is that there are a number of different changing preferences, and there are a number of different, opportunities that have presented themselves to really look at how the work environment and how employees engage with one another. And it's really provided that opportunity to sort of look at things and how they've been done in the past, and really actually made everyone sort of look more carefully in terms of how potentially it could benefit organizations moving forward in the future. I'm actually a work from home individual. I've been working from home for almost over now 20 years. And my situation is absolutely a hybrid environment where I've had the opportunity to not only go into the office, but also be able to work remotely for longer periods of time, not only in sales, but also in marketing too as well. And really what this does provide us is, an opportunity to look at how we're engaging with employees, where our employees are actually located, how we're actually helping the organization be more competitive with regards to our labor resources and our expertise around the globe. So all of those things have definitely provided an opportunity. But one of the things that's definitely missing is really around that human connection, right? As a sales or a marketing person, I always got the ability to break up, be able to actually go into a physical office to meet with teams or meet with customers face to face. And what we have seen over the last couple of years is that some of that connection has been broken. And so with this technology and with this current environment, we have to find different ways to be able to express that. We have to be able to find different ways to actually connect in different ways. And I think that the better the organization can actually address these things, both from a technology standpoint, both in the people standpoint, both in supporting both, is absolutely going to be a competitive advantage moving forward. So here are some of the facts. We did a return to work survey over 9,000 employees. And some very interesting things, right? 50% folks, full-time employees who worked hybrid or remotely during COVID would rather work from home permanently. 31% expect to work in a hybrid or remote working arrangement within 2022. So the need to actually find solutions that work for everyone in a hybrid environment is absolutely a necessity. And then on top of that as well, when we're talking about human connections and being able to connect, 57% agree that remote and hybrid work has made them more empathetic towards people. And that's great. I mean, it absolutely has to be that way. Although there is a significant amount that still need to better understand that. But it's absolutely important to make sure that we put the considerations of people, their needs, their differences, and the way they need to be able to foster that work environment. It absolutely has to make sure that they're able to express that and be able to reinforce that, and organizations can help support that as we move forward. And then, of course, we're seeing this shift, right? The Great Resignation is really, again, has definitely seen changes in the organization. But where we're actually have seen the most movement is in the older age categories of folks, right, who are just choosing to sort of take themselves out of the labor pool, retiring early, or being able to, consider taking themselves and considering what to do next. But we're seeing a significant change in that area. But what we're seeing in the 25 to 44-year-olds is that they do believe they can build personal relationships with coworkers without ever physically meeting them. And so that is, again, changes within generations, being able to understand what those changes are and what their thought process is. And all of those things have to go into consideration to be able to, in a sense, create a better hybrid work environment, right, that everybody can participate in, be part of, and feel inclusive in or around. So that's some very important points there. But I would definitely take a look, go to our website and take a look about more insights and around that return to work survey. A lot of great things there. But what we're seeing here is that, if we take a moment to look at your workday, my workday, it has absolutely become more flexible, right? And people love this flexibility, right? Before, maybe they felt that they were too tied to a desk, right? Maybe they felt like they didn't have the ability or the time to be able to take care of some family matters or members, or actually take care of themselves in a different way by being able to mix up what their work environment was, getting a walk in during the day, recharging and re-energizing. But what we've definitely seen is that the new employee experience is really around the ability to be more mobile, right? And being able to move freely, being able to move wherever their workspace may be, right? That is the beauty of being able to work from anywhere. But again, it's this sort of that motion with regards to, as we're coming out of the pandemic, is that finding that right balance within each of the different departments, within each of the different organizations, within each of the different teams, right? Everyone collaborates a little bit differently. And so, of course, we want to be able to provide that flexibility. We want to be able to reinforce that, but we also want to support that too as well. So in this particular case here, I think that everybody can begin to understand and appreciate the fact that, as we're becoming more mobile, you want the technology to work with the way that you are working, right? Whether it be at home, whether it be on the move using public transportation, whether it be in your car, whether it be in the office, we absolutely need to be able to demand better tools and technologies to be able to support this. And whether it be email, whether it be team messaging, whether it be video meetings or just calls themselves, you want that flexibility and you need to be able to provide that to your employees. And so that's what RingCentral is all about, is simplifying business communications. You can do all of this on RingCentral, not only for phone communications, but also for messaging and for video and so forth. And so we allow a single platform to allow very powerful business communications that really help transform organizations, not only for hybrid work, but for productivity, right? For other various different benefits, right? Being able to connect better with your customers, being able to solve their problems more effectively. All of those things can actually happen on RingCentral. So RingCentral is putting, right, that human element, that human experience at the center of our technology, so we are able to succeed today and in the future in whatever it may bring. So customers, we absolutely saw customers who were using RingCentral, they adjusted very, very quickly to their new work environment as the pandemic hit. It enabled them to be able to adjust much more quickly. And so what we know is that the preferences of users, and as we move into this new environment, things will change, right? Preferences will change. And our customers are going to be able to adjust to that as quickly as it comes up. And so that is a great thread with regards to our organizations and our customers that are using RingCentral, is that it does provide them that flexibility of whatever that environment may be, and whatever the definition of hybrid work is, we're going to be able to support them. And most importantly, what we have seen is that our solutions really do break down the barriers, right? Break down the barriers in terms of distance, and it helps people come together, right? And enables them to communicate, collaborate, work together in a very secure manner, right? From anywhere. And we're not just talking about employees doing employee-to-employee communications, but really that notion of being able to deliver better customer service, not only from our unified communications as a service platform, but also our contact center platform as a service platform as well. So combination of the UC and CC, we can absolutely help all organizations, no matter what the size, from very, very small to very, very large. We have the solutions that are enabling and being able to help organizations transfer some of these challenges. And so what are some of these barriers, right? What we're seeing is that there is absolutely a demand, in terms of providing better mobility for their employees, right? And being able to support that hybrid environment. But we're also seeing too as well is that organizations want to provide more modalities, right? Different types of ways that they want to be able to communicate freely, whether it be messaging or whether it be phone or for video and all of these types of things. They absolutely want that freedom and flexibility. Another big area that we're seeing is that the ability to actually embed business communications into the applications of their choice. So we're seeing organizations wanting to actually take their common CRM application, whether it be Zendesk or whether it be Salesforce, and they want to embed communications directly into those applications of wherever they live. And this only helps enable better productivity. It reduces the amount of switching between productivity applications. And we're also seeing organizations who really want to just standardize on a platform that enables all of these capabilities with the highest performance and the quality of voice communications and video communications. So these are all very, very important things. And then, of course, as I mentioned, is the new requirements of being able to combine a UC platform with a contact center platform to ensure that when you're supporting customers and their organizations, that you can collaborate as quickly as possible with all your subject matter experts, no matter where they are in the world, to be able to resolve customer challenges more quickly, right? First call resolutions, finding that expert as quickly as possible, reducing hold times. It's just the same whether you're an internal employee looking to contact HR or the customer looking to contact their customer support. We just want to be able to find the answers as quickly as possible, be routed to the right subject matter expert, and resolve those. So what we say here is that, whether or not you're on a laptop, whether or not you're on a mobile device, or you're in a room, it's anywhere, any device, any modality, seamlessly switching between all of those. So one of the best capabilities of RingCentral, if you ever get the opportunity to experience it, which I highly encourage you to do, is that you are able to switch between modalities ever so easily. So I can be on a phone call. I can go ahead and elevate to a video call. Then I can go back to a phone call. And then if I'm on my desktop, I can go ahead and actually switch it over to my mobile device and go on a walk, get a cup of coffee, come on back, and actually switch to my desktop again. And that type of freedom in terms of moving from device to device continues to help, obviously try to have the work follow you, right? And then being able to actually do that into a room environment too as well. So if I was actually walking into the building because I was a couple minutes late for my meeting, I can start it on my phone. I can switch it over to the room device into the room, and then I can continue on going. So that type of freedom and flexibility is huge in terms of productivity and huge in terms of being able to support this new hybrid work type of environment where we're always on the go. And then there's another element too as well. When you start talking about the way that you work, what we've seen is that organizations and individuals have always maybe perhaps looked at work as more of a scheduled types of activities, right? And so scheduling a meeting, right, it's very static, but now we have the ability to really be much more dynamic in that entire workflow process. So not only do we support scheduled meetings, but we want to also be able to really enable spontaneous meetings, right? So they're very, very important in a hybrid work environment. It's being more spontaneous. That's the water cooler types of communications. That's the one where you're finding people as you're passing by in a break room. You need a technology that enables you to be as spontaneous as possible. And then, of course, that it's not just a single work stream of work, but it's actually an ongoing work stream, right? An ongoing conversation. Collaboration is ongoing. And it really doesn't have an end, right? And so these are the things that we want to introduce, and we want to make sure that our technology is addressing these things, because this is the way that you're going to be able to be most productive in a hybrid environment. And so what I want to do now is sort of talk about some of the key capabilities. This is sort of my greatest hit of the things that I love about RingCentral, and that I want to go ahead and communicate to you in terms of what their benefits are. And then I hope that I'm encouraging you to actually come to our website, learn more, reach out to an expert who can help you even further along this journey and evaluation of better communication systems that are going to enable you to simplify business communications. So one of the big things here is live transcriptions. And you're saying goodbye to, hey, could you repeat that? And this is one of the AI-enabled capabilities that is really, how do I say, used on a daily basis. So what we're actually able to do is that you're joining in a video meeting, you can actually turn on live transcription. So it's actually giving you the transcription of what's happening in that meeting exactly at that time with all the various different participants. So if you come late or somebody comes late to the meeting, they actually can go through that live transcription and actually catch up to the first 2-3 minutes of the meeting or even more. So that's going to help, in a sense, make your meetings more productive. But it also leads to a number of different productivity benefits, right? Being able to transcribe your meetings, being able to review them, being actually able to just read some of the conversation that's going on. It's actually a capability that I use because it actually enables me to actually listen and also read at the same time to make sure that I'm actually hearing certain messages from certain individuals. So that's really great. The second one that I want to talk about is the meeting summaries, right? Similar to this way, it's actually after the meeting. Some people record their meetings. Of course, that's definitely one way to do that, to go through that. But meeting summaries actually gives you a synopsis of the meeting. And then again, it's a great way for folks who weren't able to actually attend the meeting, but it's awesome for other folks who actually attended the meeting to be able to summarize, to go through, and this really does combat meeting fatigue, right? And so that is really helping individuals become more productive and also reduce that fatigue. So that's fantastic, and another thing that RingCentral does uniquely provide that I would suggest that you take a look. As well as whiteboards. Whiteboards have been around for decades, right? But persistent whiteboards in your team groups and being able to take a whiteboard and always continuously collaborate on that whiteboard is another form of collaboration that is fantastic, right? And so again, taking it away from that static to that ongoing really does help continue that collaboration cycle within an organization. And so whiteboards are very, very common in a physical environment, right? The big whiteboards. And then being able to do that here, but also not making sure that you're erasing them is always fun. So I would absolutely, that's another great way that you can continue on in a hybrid work environment. And then as well as the webinars, right? Webinars for larger team meetings. This is a fantastic way to make sure that everybody is on the same page. And the frequency in which folks are actually able to leverage webinars. Between our video meetings and webinars, it's the same interface, right? And so you can run a webinar in a similar way. You can be familiar with the technology, so there is no gap in terms of the knowledge. There is no learning curve, and it's just very, very easy to be able to do that. So you can begin to leverage a webinar, not only for your internal, again, but your external, that extends how you're actually reaching people inside your organization and outside of your organization. So making it just as easy as running a video meeting in the same interface, highly beneficial. And then collaborative notes. Collaborative notes are awesome, right? This is where everybody inside of a meeting has the ability to actually contribute into that meeting. And again, they're persistent. And then, of course, so as we're talking about being able to go from room to room or environment to environment, this is very, very important with regards to being able to just be able to seamlessly move through, being able to make sure that participants inside of the meeting have the ability to all participate together and collaborate together and be able to be seen and heard. Very, very important there. And again, the last item here is the meeting switching, which we talked about, mobile from desktop to mobile, and then mobile to switching. Again, seamless switching capabilities between our technologies. And then the last one here is our dynamic EE. This is a fantastic way to be able to do end-to-end encryption for the most secure meetings on the planet. So we're already secure, we already use encryption, but this really makes this even that much more to be able to have private conversations. So again, this is synonymous to say, hey, I want to have a conversation with you. Let's go into a meeting room where we close the door and have that conversation. You can actually do that within the digital environment, within our applications too as well. So I just wanted to really quickly is go into one last item here is that when you're really looking to find solutions as you're looking and evaluating business communications to make them simpler, to make them easier, to make them, more pervasive within your organization, we have a number of different solutions that we can help your organization solve some of these challenges and really be able to help simplify your business communications. So with that, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today. Hopefully there's some questions out there that I can go ahead and pick up on.
Hi, Kim. Yes, please. We are a little short on time, but I think we can take one or two questions, and then we'll try to get your questions in. And we can't take, we'll get over to Ken for later. One I just was going to throw up. A reader wrote in and said we have RC and it works great. So there you go. Let's start with this question. What areas of the workforce are being most impacted by hybrid work, either for good or bad?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some organizations, because RingCentral has a customer base that's from the very, very small SMB to the very, very large enterprise organizations that not only cover collaborative communications within their employees, but also in the largest contact centers that are run throughout the globe. What we're seeing is really overall, every single organization is touched by hybrid work. What we're seeing is that a lot of, inter-communications, inter-employee communications can really be improved and fostered by being able to actually do this, what we would consider as the hybrid, or being able to leverage these technologies. So in terms of employee performance and management, you can actually touch people much more frequently and have more check-in points. So we're actually seeing a lot of that. Again, I would definitely point to that study, that work study, to get more details in that. But we're absolutely seeing overall, you can actually see better satisfaction between employees. And then in terms of support organizations and so forth, again, being able to have that frontline worker with the technology, with a single platform to be able to connect them to their back offices is only helping deliver better services to customers. And so that's extremely important too as well.
And then, Ken, before we go, can you please let people know again, if they want to find out more about the products, what is the best way to go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I encourage everyone to go to ringcentral.com. There's a number you can immediately click to get your contact information to be able to speak with a sales specialist that can help you along, whether or not you're a small business or a large enterprise. We can definitely find the resources necessary to make sure that you get that information that you need to really make a great decision in terms of planning to bring these types of technologies into your organization, whether you're doing it for preparing for hybrid work, whether you're looking to consolidate various different disparate platforms, whether you're looking to just reduce some of your costs associated with managing different platforms, or you're really looking to transform your organization into becoming more hybrid or delivering better customer service, we can definitely help you.
Awesome. Ken, thank you so much for being with us here today. We really appreciate it. We will get those other questions over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
And guys, now we're on to our final presenter for the day. We're thrilled to have with us Robert Cruz, Vice President of Information Governance at Smarsh. Robert, please take it away.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I will take the last few minutes here and just build on some of the things that were just discussed in the previous session from our partners at RingCentral. I'm going to focus on the collaboration and compliance aspects, and specifically kind of thinking about, as stated here, we're not just talking about the devices or the locations of individuals now that we're into this hybrid work scenario. It's also the information that's being generated, how individuals are communicating and collaborating, the way they're getting their work done. And I think it's very well stated that companies are seeing this as the most important, the most strategic asset in their organization, and information that needs to be protected and secured, with enterprise-grade technology, which is what we're delivering to our customers. Now, how has this affected our clients overall, from large and small, regulated and non-regulated? I think the theme is the same, which is the way that they're doing business has fundamentally been transformed. And you look at any of these communication sources, a lot of these are familiar. We all spend all day long, for me, more than 6 hours a day on Microsoft Teams, a couple of hours a day on Zoom. But there's also the aspect here that's changing the workforce in terms of familiarity with new tools. A lot of firms that we talk to are seeing the impact of Gen Z employees and clients that have their own requirements and own familiarity with social media tools. The number one downloaded application in the world right now is TikTok. And so you see this pattern emerging where it's not just about us being remote, us relying upon these tools, but you're also seeing now this plethora of new tools entering the workplace every day. So, as one example, large client of ours, today, the tools that they allow for use to do business, it exceeds 100. So just think of the challenge there, that each of these tools are different. Each has its own way of accessing. Each has its own way of communicating or conveying, what's being discussed. What does the conversation look like in Teams? That's different than in Zoom. That's different than on a social media application. This creates a number of implications for firms that are having to implement controls that work uniformly. And for us, the notion of hybrid work really is not just about, employees being distributed between home office and at home. It's the fact that I may work Monday and Wednesday in the office, Tuesday, Thursday at home, and be in some remote location on Friday. My controls need to work uniformly. So it's really working from anywhere. And it's affecting the entire organization, not just the frontline staff. We're seeing this across these organizations. Now, the problem that we see for a lot of organizations is that this happens so fast that a lot of companies are trying to deal with the way they're communicating and collaborating today with technologies that they may have deployed 10 or 15 years ago. So, we see this all the time where organizations have one system that was implemented for a content repository, another system that was deployed for records management or for e-discovery or for dealing with risk inspection. And the problem is that each of these have a single purpose. These all become stovepipes and become much more difficult for firms to try to adapt and respond to what's happening in the marketplace right now. So a lot of firms that we're working with are trying to get from this picture of having all of these stovepipes of information to now wanting to leverage this information as an asset. What we see is a challenge that uniquely is created by collaboration. And some firms have told us that they see collaboration as almost incongruent with their compliance obligations, because Microsoft Teams and any other collaborative platform is unique. It's unique because of its persistent elements. It's unique because of the interactivity, because people can post and like and share and edit comments, that they can have collaboration around documents, the use of modern attachments. This is great for productivity. Having a link to an attachment works perfectly for folks that have to work across a distributed work team. It's a lot harder if you're a compliance executive and have to worry about, is that link potentially going to become out of date at some point, and you need that historical record. All of these tools have different ways of capturing and storing the data. And this is something that we work with all of the companies that we provide connectors for, making sure that we understand what's going on with the APIs, how is it evolving over time. But these are evolving as we speak. There's another method that firms are implementing that gets rolled out to clients, and in some cases, these are defaulted on without advance notice to some of these organizations, which creates a number of challenges. And finally, just again, because of the collaborative nature, if you have 15 people in a collaborative discussion and you need to figure out, what took place 6 months ago with all of these individuals it's very difficult if you're forcing all of this interactive information into a system that treats all of this as messages, which is the way that a lot of technologies work in the risk management, e-discovery, and regulatory compliance spaces. So think of this interactive, multidimensional communication now having to be stripped down into a series of messages. It becomes quite a challenge for firms to have to reassemble. So how have we sorted this out? What are the things that we're doing here to help customers deal with this? And it really falls into three pillars. The first pillar is our capture technology is allowing organizations to capture the uniqueness of all of these communication sources. We work directly with Microsoft and the other providers to understand, what are the features and functions unique to each of those sources? What are the methods of access that we can take advantage of in terms of APIs and other ways that we get ability to see what's happening in those communication streams? So we work with the providers to grab that information, to preserve the historical record. Then we have the ability to take that technology, deploy either on the cloud or on-prem into our communications warehouse, which is essentially providing the ability to store this data, to be able to create policies to retain it, to be able to provide the inspection, to run searches, to deal with investigations, but very importantly, to preserve all the things that are unique about each of these communication sources that, as they were originally natively rendered. Now, once you've done that, you have the ability to build applications on top. And based upon our market space, we have built applications for supervisory review if you're in the wealth management space, in financial services. We have applications that help companies deal with litigation and e-discovery if you need to be able to deal with legal holds and production of data for document review. And we've worked with technologies, including our own, to be able to apply advanced analytics to do more sophisticated machine learning and natural language processing applications to be able to identify risk. Because ultimately you need to be able to see across these silos of information, these various haystacks to find the needles. So great application for natural language processing and conduct surveillance as one of the application spaces. Now, just real quickly, how do we work with teams? We have a great relationship with Microsoft. We've been here for the entire ride, from Teams back through Lync to OCS, MCS. We've had a long history with Microsoft, and we understand the nature of collaboration and how it works. And so we're able to capture these conversations, including chats, edits and deletes to messages, things that are uploaded as files, emojis, images, and other content sources. And we're able to do this for one-to-one conversations, one-to-many, and persistent dialogues. So it really treats collaborative content the way that it should be, according to all of that richness and that dynamic nature of it. Now, once we've captured this, one of the important things is to be able to understand the activity related to the messages, not just the information itself, because really the context is what's important here. If an individual is engaged on one of these communication platforms, you need to know who is communicating with whom about what and what kind of activity surrounds that, because that's ultimately what is going to be what the compliance and legal folks are going to be most concerned about. Now, just finally, the message of, or the notion of being able to represent this information in a way that preserves its integrity. Why is that important? It's important because if you look at how do you manage the risk of working from anywhere, it's like I really need to understand all of the aspects of a conversation. I need to be able to see that so that they're represented the way they were in the original native content source. I need to be able to make my legal and compliance teams efficient so that they can understand, where is the risk. And I need to be able to help them to be more efficient and be able to get to very large volumes of data, which is what we're seeing today as the function of the last 2 years of the pandemic, but now also as we become much more reliant upon these digital communication tools. So quite a bit here to talk through in a very short period of time, but we hope to be able to talk further with you regarding how we work together with some of these collaborative technologies, how we are enabling the work from anywhere reality that we see across our client base, and how to mitigate some of the risks that you're having to face both from a regulatory perspective as well as dealing with other potential exposures that could harm your business. So Smarsh.com information here, my contact information as well. Would love to be able to talk with you further. And with that, we'll take any time left for questions if we have them.
And we do have questions. And guys, if you have any more questions for Robert, go ahead and get them in now. I got to say that last screen you had that contextual. The contextual, I know people absolutely are going to love that. That's really, really great stuff right there. So a lot of this is great.
Thank you.
I saw that. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of the problems that you talked about at the beginning, and you know this, those are exactly the things that we're hearing from our readers. You know, they struggled. They had to get up that access anywhere, anytime, and then they have all these stovepipes. So it's exactly the kind of things that our readers are dealing with right now. So let's go ahead and start with this question. How do you manage modern attachments? Which I think all the file formats, all those types of things.
That's a great question, because that is something that we see has caused quite a bit of headache for the firms that are heavily regulated. Because again, the notion is I need to have the assurance and comfort that at some point in the future, if I have to look back at a link to an attachment, that link is still going to be active and valid. And so one of the ways that we deal with that is the ability to preserve the original content source, the file, if you will. So we can capture both the information that might be residing within SharePoint or OneDrive and keep that associated to that particular conversation, to keep that attached to the chat, so that if I look at that 5 years from now, I'm still going to have that original asset attached to the link to the attachment. So it's kind of helping you to preserve some of the integrity by maintaining the original file with the conversation that it was associated with.
And here's another question from readers. Where is your solution deployed?
Great question. And what we found, because of the content volume and variety that firms are now running into, it goes back to that stovepipe problem. It's like a lot of firms are realizing they can't manage this effectively, in their own data center or in their own IT environment. So we are deployed natively in the cloud, supporting the major cloud providers. And what that allows us to do is to help the customer be very agile. So, we can deploy geographically an instance in the U.S., in Europe, elsewhere in the world. But we're taking advantage of all the innovation that's happening in public cloud. So we are an application running on top of that infrastructure. And that's really given us the scale, the resiliency, the flexibility to deploy, wherever your business takes you. So it's really a perfect example of an application that makes use of some of the innovations that are happening there.
What search and export performance do you see for large deployments?
Another great question, and it kind of ties to the last one, which is, the ability to take an application like this and run it at hyperscale, really requires the ability to deploy and apply resources agilely, and we can do that with the public cloud infrastructure that we leverage. So for a very large bank that may be operating in 10 to 15 different geographic regions, we can scale up or scale down as they require. So we can achieve some very significant improvements in throughput versus what somebody may have experienced, in managing these systems on-prem. Adding more scale to the ingestion gateway, to the processing of data and running searches, as well as the ability to export these very large volumes. I mean, this is basically the essence of how we've worked together with Microsoft for some of the very largest customers in the world.
All right. How many seats can you deploy your solution for?
Great question, and that's one of the things that would love to talk further with you on this. We have some of the largest implementations of Teams, in particular in financial services, where there could be north of 100,000 users that are deployed on Teams. So it's really helping companies to deploy this at enterprise scale, and that's one of the challenges we've seen companies faced with is how do you make a digital transformation work? You've got to be able to affect a large number of your employees, and that's something that we have a history and a track record of being able to do at the very largest scales for these very complex regulated companies.
And then, Robert, I know it's on the screen, you talked a little bit, but again, if people want to get their hands on a product, do a demo, that type of thing, what is the very best way to go about that?
I would reach out to, or just, take a visit through smarsh.com. We've got quite a few assets there where you can get some additional visuals of how the product works. Would love to be able to set up some time to do kind of a more custom run through, depending upon your specific use case. But yeah, I think start with smarsh.com, and then from there we can direct you to the right folks that, depending upon where you're at with industry, what particular driver is taking your organization through the use of Teams, we can build the right demo scenarios for you.
And then, if you don't mind, I'm going to close it out by asking you, because you deal with companies that are dealing with these issues day in and day out and helping them. Do you have is there any parting advice or anything that you could single out to share with our readers?
Yeah, I think one key thing, and we hear this consistently from all of our customers, but in particular the very large ones, is that any organization is going to be running on a multiple set of technologies, and that list of technologies is going to be perpetually evolving. There's always going to be the next network. And unless you want to be in the technology business, it's very hard for a firm to do that on their own. So there's really a premium for working with someone like us, because we can maintain those relationships with the content providers. We can make sure that we understand what's coming next. Our relationship with Microsoft and others helped us do that. So, we can help to alleviate some of the burden of just trying to stay on top of what and how fast these technologies are innovating, which is very fast. So, just look for an expert to help you stay on top of the next communication source that your business is driving you toward.
Awesome. Robert, thank you so much for being with us today. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it, everyone.
And with that, guys, we're now going to be announcing the winner of the drawing. It is Chris Tuflo with MyCloud IT. Chris, congratulations. Someone from our marketing department will reach out to you so you can claim your prize. Thank you guys, everybody, for being with us today. As you guys know, we really appreciate you being with us. Please be sure to take that survey at the end. Let us know what you thought so we can plan more of the events. And again, thank you to our sponsors, Martello, Splashtop, Okta, RingCentral, and Smarsh. We're just so thrilled to have them underwriting our content and supporting the community. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.